Hey guys, tonight we're talking about the moment one man killed the Roman Republic by wading through a river you could spit across. January 10th, 49 BC. A 52-year-old general stands at a stream so pathetic that calling it a river feels generous. Yet this puddle separates legal military command from automatic death sentence for treason. Cross it with armed soldiers and Roman law declares you hostis publicus, enemy of all mankind, a designation that means any citizen can legally murder you on sight. The Senate has just voted to strip Gaius Julius Caesar of his command in Gaul, his legal immunity, and his right to stand for consul while absent from Rome. They've given him a choice: disband your army and enter Rome defenceless to face decades of accumulated enemies in court, or keep your army and become Rome's most wanted criminal. It's democracy wielded as a knife. The brilliance is that either option destroys him. Option 1. His creditors seize everything. His political rivals prosecute him for every questionable decision he made conquering Gaul, and he ends his days in exile or a prison cell. Option 2. Civil war against the entire might of Rome's military machine commanded by Pompey the Great, who's won battles on 3 continents and never lost a campaign. Dear viewers, our big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and with your support, we can achieve it. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about war. Subscribe so you don't miss them. We're sincerely grateful to everyone who helps us achieve this goal. Also, write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious to see people from all over the world brought together by a single story. And now, let's move on to today's story. You're 52. You've never seen a world where Rome didn't govern through Senate and assemblies. You've never questioned that the Republic is eternal, that its laws are sacred, that crossing into Italy with legions is the one unforgivable sin that destroyed the Gracchi, that got Marius exiled, that made Sulla a monster whose prescription list nailed names to the Forum wall and meant death squads hunting senators through Rome's streets. You know that military power and political office must stay separated the way you know bronze rusts in sea air. The morning brought no omens worth trusting. A sacrifice the night before showed unclear entrails, which the Haruspecs interpreted as the gods remaining silent rather than forbidding action. A distinction only desperate men find comforting. The priest said nothing useful because priests serve whoever pays them, and right now nobody knows who that will be tomorrow. Caesar's armour sits heavy across shoulders that have carried it through 9 years of Gallic winters, German forests, and 2 expeditions to that fog-shrouded island the locals call Britannia. The bronze plates are dented, repaired, dented again. His gladius hangs at his left hip, its blade worn thin from sharpening, its balance perfect from 1,000 practice sessions. This weapon has killed Gauls, Germans, Belgi warriors who painted themselves blue and screamed their gods' names while dying. It's never tasted Roman blood, not the cold you'd expect from January. Unseasonable warmth has turned the ground to mud that sucks at boots with every step. The Rubicon flows lazy and brown, swollen from winter rains, but still barely 15 feet across at this ford. You could throw a stone to the far bank. Children could wade it without drowning. This insignificant trickle of water is the legal boundary of Italy. The Pomerium extended north, the line where proconsular imperium ends and entering with military force becomes the capital crime that makes you worse than a murderer, worse than a traitor, worse than a barbarian. The 13th Legion waits behind him. 6,000 men who followed him from the Atlantic to the Rhine. They're not the massive formations Rome fields when it mobilizes for foreign wars. Caesar has left his other legions in Gaul under trusted officers, both because moving them would take too long, and because bringing his entire army south would eliminate any pretense that this might be negotiation rather than invasion. These 6,000 are enough to protect him, not enough to conquer Italy against determined resistance. They're a statement. I come in strength, but not overwhelming strength. I'm ready to talk, but I won't be defenseless. Except the Senate has made talking impossible. The vote came 3 days ago. Marcus Antonius and Quintus Cassius, tribunes of the plebs and Caesar's allies in Rome, exercised their sacred veto right to block the Senate's decree stripping Caesar of command. The Senate's conservative faction, led by Marcus Porcius Cato and enabled by Pompey's silent acquiescence, simply ignored the veto, a violation of Roman constitutional tradition so profound that Antonius and Cassius fled the city in fear for their lives, disguised as slaves, and rode north to Caesar's camp with the news that Rome's government had abandoned its own rules to destroy him. The political manoeuvring had been elegant in its cruelty. Caesar requested the right to stand for consulship in absentia, remaining with his army in Gaul until elected, at which point consular immunity would protect him from prosecution. Perfectly legal. Pompey himself had been granted the same privilege years earlier. The Senate refused. Caesar offered to resign his command if Pompey would do the same, creating a level field where both entered Rome as private citizens. Pompey's allies refused on his behalf. Caesar proposed keeping just Cisalpine Gaul and 2 legions until the election. Refused. Finally, desperately, Caesar said he'd surrender everything except Illyricum and 1 legion. That too was rejected. The message was clear. Crawl to Rome on your belly or die. 3 people bear primary responsibility for this impossible choice. Cato, incorruptible and inflexible, who genuinely believes Caesar represents tyranny and must be stopped at any cost to preserve republican virtue. Pompey, whose ego cannot tolerate a rival, who spent the last year letting himself be manoeuvred into opposing his former ally, because being Rome's sole military champion feels better than sharing glory. And the Senate's conservative faction, terrified old men who see Caesar's popularity with the common people and remember how Marius used the mob to override traditional authority. What they've failed to calculate is that backing a wolf into a corner doesn't make it submit. Caesar has debts that would bankrupt most kingdoms. 9 years of campaigning in Gaul brought him enormous plunder, which he immediately spent on public works, bribes, games, and subsidized grain for Rome's poor. He owes Crassus's estate millions of sesterces. He owes Balbus. He owes Oppius. He owes dozens of senators who funded his career expecting future returns. Without consular immunity or proconsular command, his creditors will strip him of every asset, and his political enemies will ensure he never holds office again. Financial ruin and legal destruction await in Rome. But he has something more valuable than money. Standing in the mud behind him are 6,000 men who worship him. These veterans of the 13th have endured horrors in Gaul that would break normal soldiers. They've starved during sieges, frozen during winter campaigns, and watched brothers in arms die in forests so thick that Roman formations couldn't maintain proper lines. Caesar made them rich with plunder and kept them alive with tactical brilliance. They're loyal in a way that transcends the normal bond between Roman general and legions. The Senate is counting on that loyalty having limits. Traditional Roman soldiers serve the Republic, not individual commanders. Legions disband after campaigns. Veterans retire to small farms. The system is designed specifically to prevent what Caesar is contemplating, a permanent professional army personally devoted to its general. But 9 years fighting together in Gaul has transformed the 13th into something new. These aren't citizens doing military service before returning to normal life. This is their life. The legion is their family, their home, their identity. They're professional soldiers in a republic designed around citizen militias. A messenger arrives, his horse lathered from hard riding. The man slides from the saddle and kneels. News from Rome. The Senate has declared a senatus consultum ultimum, the emergency decree that suspends normal legal protections and authorizes the consuls to use any means necessary to protect the state. Translation: anyone who supports Caesar can be killed legally, without trial, and the Senate will call it patriotism rather than murder. The decree has only been used a handful of times in Roman history, always during moments of existential crisis. The Gracchi brothers died under its authority. Saturninus died. Catilina's conspiracy was crushed with it. Every time it meant blood on the forum floor and corpses floating in the Tiber. The Senate has escalated beyond political maneuvering into preparation for violence. Another messenger arrives within the hour. Pompey is mobilizing legions and has assumed military command of all forces in Italy. He's recalling veteran centurions. He's activating emergency levies. The entire apparatus of Roman military power is turning towards stopping one general with one legion. Caesar's officers gather around him. Asinius Pollio, young and brilliant, who'll survive to write histories of these events. Gaius Scribonius Curio, who switched from being Caesar's enemy to his ally and brought crucial intelligence about Senate plans. Mark Antony himself, who fled Rome in disguise and reached the camp yesterday with confirmation that negotiation is dead. They're waiting for orders, and their faces show they already know what those orders must be. The mathematics of the situation are brutal. Pompey commands respect, connections and resources throughout the Mediterranean. He can raise armies in Spain, Africa and the East. His clients include dozens of kingdoms. He's Rome's greatest living general, never defeated in battle, called Magnus, the Great, because his victories span continents. Against him stands Caesar with one legion, and whatever forces he can scrape together in Gaul. But Pompey has grown cautious over the years. He's 58, comfortable, more politician than soldier lately. His last campaign was years ago. He's relied on his reputation while Caesar has spent 9 years in constant warfare, adapting, innovating, learning. Pompey's tactical knowledge is 15 years out of date. His soldiers are recruits and hastily recalled veterans. Caesar's are hardened killers who faced Vercingetorix and survived. Speed might compensate for numbers. Surprise could offset Pompey's resources. Audacity might shatter Rome's will to fight before the Republic's full strength mobilizes against him. The Rubicon keeps flowing, indifferent to the decision being made on its bank. Farmers on the far side are working their fields, unaware that history is about to pivot on this muddy stream. In Rome, senators debate. In Spain, Pompey's legions drill. In the East, client kings wait to see which Roman to support. The entire Mediterranean world is holding its breath without knowing it. Caesar has one more option nobody's mentioned. He could fall on his sword right here, spare Rome a civil war, and die with dignity intact. Cato would approve. History might remember him as a patriot who put republic before ambition. His soldiers would go home. Pompey would dominate Rome unchallenged. The Senate's conservative faction would congratulate themselves on preserving tradition. That option dies unspoken because Caesar didn't conquer Gaul, cross the Rhine, invade Britannia twice, and build a reputation as Rome's finest general, just to surrender to mediocrities wielding laws they themselves are violating. He removes his general's cloak, the paludamentum that marks his rank and authority. Without it, he's just another citizen. He hands it to an aide and steps toward the river in a simple tunic like any traveller might wear. The symbolism is deliberate. I approach Italy as a citizen seeking justice, not a general bringing war. But his hand stays on his gladius. The 13th Legion stays formed up behind him. The standards remain raised. These details contradict the peaceful citizen imagery. The water is cold despite the unseasonable warmth. It soaks through his boots on the first step. The current, weak as it is, pushes against his shins. Mud sucks at each footfall. He's halfway across before he speaks, and the words are in Greek, a language educated Romans use when they want to sound philosophical rather than legal. Anariphtokivos. The die is cast. Not I have cast the die, or let the die be cast, but a passive construction. The die is being cast, agency removed, as if forces beyond his control are making this decision. It's perfect political rhetoric disguised as fatalism. He's not choosing to cross. Circumstances have thrown the dice, and now everyone must live with the outcome. The far bank rises under his feet. Italian soil, legally entered with an armed force at his back. He's broken the law. There's no walking this back. No negotiation will erase the fact that he's crossed with legions. From this moment until either he or the Republic is destroyed, he's hostis publicus, the enemy. Behind him, 6,000 men hear their general's boots hit Italian ground. They've been waiting for this permission. The 13th Legion surges into the Rubicon, splashing through water that barely reaches their knees, shouting war cries that echo across the farmland. Standards dip and rise with each step. Armour clanks. Officers bark orders to keep formations tight. Within minutes, the entire legion stands in Italy, illegal and unstoppable, looking to Caesar for their next command. He points south, toward Rome. The march begins before anyone can reconsider. News of the crossing will reach the Senate in 2 days. Pompey will hear within 3. By the time Rome realizes what's happening, Caesar will have advanced 50 miles into Italy, and the point of no return will be 100 miles behind him. The Roman Republic has roughly 1 year left to live, though nobody knows it yet. The civil war beginning at this pathetic river crossing will rage for 4 years, consume 3 continents, kill hundreds of thousands, and end with Rome's governmental system destroyed beyond repair. Future generations will mark this moment as when the Republic died, and the Empire began its long, inevitable birth. But right now, in the unseasonable warmth of a January afternoon, it's just a middle-aged general with thinning hair, massive debts, and 1 loyal legion, gambling everything on the belief that Pompey will hesitate, the Senate will panic, and Rome will choose the known quantity of Caesar's clemency over the unknown horror of prolonged civil war. The gamble starts now. The die is cast, and Gaius Julius Caesar, formerly proconsul of Gaul, currently enemy of the Roman state, has just bet his life that he can move faster than Rome's entire governmental system can organize to stop him. Caesar covers 30 miles the first day, which should be impossible for a full legion with baggage train. His soldiers march light. Each man carries his weapons, minimal rations, and nothing else. The supply wagons stay behind in Gaul. This isn't a traditional Roman military column prepared for extended campaign. This is a forced march designed to outrun the news of the Rubicon crossing. Ariminum falls without a sword drawn. The town garrison consists of the local militia, who wake to find Caesar's advance units already inside the walls. The commander, a minor nobleman named Publius, who held his position through family connections rather than military competence, surrenders before his men finish arming themselves. Caesar pardons everyone immediately and publicly. He makes a speech in the forum about defending the rights of tribunes, protecting constitutional government, and opposing tyranny. The locals have no idea what he's talking about. The complexities of Roman senatorial politics mean nothing to provincial townspeople, but they recognize strength when it occupies their streets. The pardon establishes a pattern Caesar will repeat at every town. No executions, no looting, no rape. Soldiers caught stealing face flogging. The discipline is extraordinary for a military force that just committed treason. Traditional Roman armies sack cities, enslave populations, and enrich themselves through conquest. Caesar's forces pay for supplies, respect local magistrates, and behave like a police force rather than invaders. The message spreads faster than his legions can march. Caesar brings order, not chaos. 3 days after Ariminum, he takes Pisorum, then Phaenum, then Ancona. Each town's garrison either flees or surrenders. Nobody wants to die defending Senate policies they barely understand against a general who's offering amnesty and money for provisions. The snowball effect exceeds Caesar's most optimistic predictions. He's not conquering Italy through battle, he's collecting it through momentum. Pompey receives the news in Rome and immediately realizes his strategic nightmare. Caesar is operating inside Pompey's decision cycle. By the time reports reach Rome, verify, and Pompey issues orders in response, Caesar has already moved to the next objective. Roman military doctrine assumes campaigns progress slowly with supply lines, siege equipment, and methodical advance. Caesar has abandoned doctrine entirely. He's moving so fast that traditional countermeasures arrive too late to matter. The Senate panics spectacularly. Senators who voted to strip Caesar of command now discover that voting and enforcing are different activities. Cato demands immediate mobilization, but mobilization takes weeks. Conscription lists must be reviewed. Officers must be appointed. Equipment must be distributed. Training must occur. Meanwhile, Caesar advances 15 miles closer to Rome every single day. Pompey makes his first critical decision: evacuate the Senate and government south to Capua, away from Caesar's advance. The official reasoning is strategic. Capua provides better defensive ground and access to southern Italy's recruiting population. The unofficial truth is that Pompey fears what happens if Caesar reaches Rome before the Republic's forces finish organizing. Urban riots, political chaos, mob violence. Caesar's popularity with the common people could turn the capital into a bloodbath targeting senatorial families. The evacuation itself broadcast weakness. Governments that flee their capitals look defeated before fighting begins. Citizens watching senators pack household goods onto wagons and race south interpret this as Rome's elite abandoning them. Resentment builds. Why should common Romans defend a Senate that runs away? Caesar's intelligence network, built over decades of political maneuvering, feeds him information faster than Pompey's official dispatches reach senatorial commanders. He knows Pompey is retreating before Pompey's field officers receive their orders. He knows which senators are wavering, which towns might resist, which commanders might defect. Information superiority multiplies his speed advantage. Lucius Domitius Ahenobarbus becomes Pompey's sacrificial piece. Domitius is a proud, competent general from one of Rome's most distinguished families. Pompey orders him to hold Corfinium, a strategic town in central Italy that controls key roads. Domitius garrisons Corfinium with approximately 30 cohorts, roughly 15,000 men, and prepares for siege. His plan is sound. Delay Caesar's advance, giving Pompey time to consolidate forces in the south, then crush Caesar between Domitius's garrison and Pompey's main army advancing from the rear. Caesar arrives at Corfinium in mid-February and immediately surrounds it. His forces have grown beyond the original 13th Legion. The 12th Legion has arrived from Gaul. The 8th is marching south. Local Italian recruits, impressed by Caesar's clemency and eager to join the winning side, swell his ranks daily. He now commands roughly 40,000 men against Domitius's 15,000. The siege lasts 7 days. Domitius sends desperate messages to Pompey begging for relief. Pompey's response is a masterpiece of political calculation disguised as military strategy. He orders Domitius to abandon Corfinium and retreat south to join the main army, except Domitius is already surrounded. Retreating through Caesar's siege lines would mean fighting a running battle while outnumbered 3-1. Pompey's order is effectively a death sentence delivered through military channels. Domitius tries to escape alone. He attempts sneaking out at night, leaving his soldiers to their fate. His own officers discover the plan and arrest him. The betrayal destroys what remains of his soldiers' morale. They've been ordered to hold this town by Pompey, then abandoned by that same commander, then nearly abandoned by their immediate general. They're dying for leaders who are running away. Caesar sends messages into Corfinium offering the same terms he's given everywhere. Surrender peacefully, accept pardon, go home or join his forces as you choose. No executions, no confiscations, no revenge. We hope you have already subscribed to our channel, and if not, please do so right now. Our goal is to reach our first 1,000 subscribers. This is very important to us. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about war. Subscribe so you don't miss them, and we'll get back to the story. Domitius's officers mutiny on the 7th day. They bind Domitius and march him to Caesar's camp along with their entire garrison. 15,000 soldiers surrender without Caesar losing a single man in assault. The officers expect at minimum decimation, the traditional Roman punishment where every 10th man is executed as example. Caesar pardons everyone. He returns Domitius his personal property, releases him without conditions, and offers the surrendered soldiers choice: join Caesar's legions with full pay and status, or go home to their families with safe passage guaranteed. Roughly half join Caesar immediately. The rest depart for their homes, spreading stories about Caesar's incredible clemency and Pompey's abandonment. Each pardoned soldier becomes a propaganda weapon worth more than a cohort of fighters. Caesar's army has just doubled overnight through mercy rather than combat. Pompey's strategic position deteriorates from bad to catastrophic. He's losing soldiers faster through defection than through battle. His subordinate commanders are surrendering. The Italian towns are opening their gates to Caesar. Recruiting in southern Italy produces men who don't trust Pompey's leadership and might switch sides the moment fighting starts. The Senate's authority is evaporating. When the government flees Rome and abandons its own generals, why should anyone respect its decrees? Cicero, stuck in his villa and writing frantic letters to everyone who might listen, captures the situation perfectly in his private correspondence. Pompey has no plan. He reacts rather than acts. Caesar is fighting this war like he fought Gaul, with speed, surprise, and absolute confidence. Pompey makes his second critical decision, one that will define the entire civil war: abandon Italy completely. He begins evacuating forces to Brundisium, the main port on Italy's southeastern coast. From there, he'll cross to Greece, where his power base is strongest. He controls the eastern provinces. He has client kings in Asia Minor, Syria, Egypt. His reputation from earlier campaigns makes him effectively governor of Rome's richest territories. He can recruit unlimited soldiers, train them properly, and return to Italy with overwhelming force. The strategy is logical. Italy is lost. Caesar controls the narrative, the population supports him or fears him, and Pompey's forces are melting away. Better to trade space for time, consolidate in favourable territory, and return strong rather than lose everything defending a peninsula that's already turned against the Senate. But evacuating means abandoning Rome itself to Caesar. Symbolically, politically, psychologically, it's surrender disguised as strategy. Pompey is ceding the capital of the Republic to a man the Senate has declared an enemy. Caesar realizes Pompey's plan before the evacuation begins. His scouts report unusual ship movements at Brundisium. Merchants mention seeing senators' families boarding vessels. The pattern is obvious. Caesar races south, covering ground so quickly that his legion's baggage trains fall behind and take days to catch up. He's moving faster than any Roman army in history, 30 miles per day sustained over weeks, and his target is clear: reach Brundisium before Pompey finishes evacuating. The race becomes desperate. Pompey has limited ships and thousands of soldiers to transport. He needs multiple trips across the Adriatic. Caesar just needs to arrive before the last ships depart. If he traps even part of Pompey's force in Brundisium, he can destroy it and potentially capture Pompey himself. Pompey wins by hours. Caesar's advance units reach Brundisium on March 17th to see the last transport ships pulling away from the harbour. Pompey stands on the stern of one vessel, visible to Caesar's officers on shore. The two greatest generals of their generation lock eyes across 100 yards of water, the last time they'll see each other face to face. Then Pompey's ship rounds the harbour point and disappears toward Greece. Caesar has conquered all of Italy in 60 days without fighting a single pitched battle. He's gone from criminal outlaw to master of the peninsula through speed, clemency, and Pompey's mistakes. But he's also failed his primary objective. Pompey escaped with his core forces intact. The war isn't over, it's barely begun. The strategic situation now favours Pompey despite losing Italy. He controls the seas through superior naval forces. He governs the wealthy eastern provinces. He can recruit from a population that outnumbers Italy 3-1. He has time to train soldiers properly. Caesar, by contrast, controls a peninsula that's been bankrupted by civil war disruption, faces hostile fleets blocking maritime trade, and commands an army that's exhausted from 2 months of forced marches. Caesar stands on Brundisium's walls watching Pompey's ships become dots on the horizon. His officers expect orders to pursue immediately, requisition ships, cross to Greece, and continue the chase. Instead, Caesar turns back toward Rome. He has a different priority now. The capital sits empty, abandoned by its government, legally belonging to whoever seizes it. Caesar intends to transform his military victory into political legitimacy before Pompey can organize eastern resistance. The march to Rome takes 11 days. Citizens line the roads to watch the army pass. Some cheer, some watch silently, some hide in their homes. Nobody knows what Caesar will do when he enters the city. Will he follow Sulla's example and launch proscriptions, posting names of enemies to be killed for bounties? Will he declare himself dictator immediately? Will there be massacres? Caesar enters Rome on April 1st, 49 BC. No triumphal procession. That would be premature and legally questionable since he's still technically a criminal under Senate decree. Just a general with his legions, walking through gates that should have been defended and weren't. The city's garrison fled weeks ago. The treasury officials abandoned their posts. The Senate chamber sits empty. His first act is to call a meeting of whatever senators remained in Rome. Barely 200 appear out of 600 total. Many of Caesar's allies, most of the populares faction, some neutral parties too frightened or principled to flee. Caesar addresses them respectfully, talking about restoring constitutional government, protecting tribunician rights, and defending the Republic against tyranny. The irony is spectacular. A general who crossed into Italy with an army is lecturing about constitutional propriety. Then he goes to the treasury. The doors are locked. The tribune Metellus, one of the few officials who didn't evacuate, stands guard and invokes sacred law forbidding anyone from accessing state funds without Senate authorization. Caesar has his soldiers break down the doors. Metellus protests that this is sacrilege, that the treasury is protected by religious law, that Caesar will curse himself and Rome by this violation. Caesar responds that he can make better use of the money than Pompey did by shipping it to Greece. The soldiers smash through. The inner vaults contain hundreds of talents of gold and silver, reserves accumulated over centuries of conquest. Caesar seizes everything. The money will pay his soldiers, fund continued campaigns, and finance the political maneuvering necessary to legitimize his position. It's theft dressed as emergency requisition, but nobody has the power to stop him. He spends exactly 11 days in Rome, 11 days to seize the treasury, address the skeleton senate, appoint a praetor named Marcus Aemilius Lepidus to govern the city in his absence, and arrange political marriages and alliances. Then he marches north again, leaving Rome behind despite having just conquered it. His target is Spain. Pompey left significant forces there under loyal commanders, 7 full legions in near and far Spain. Those forces threatened Caesar's grain supply from Gaul and could march through southern Gaul into Italy behind Caesar's positions. Strategically, Spain must fall before Caesar can deal with Pompey's main strength in Greece. He can't fight a two-front war. The Spanish campaign demonstrates why Caesar is considered a military genius. He faces commanders who know the terrain, have superior numbers in combined forces, and hold fortified positions. At Ilerda, Pompey's lieutenants Afranius and Petreius occupy high ground with 5 legions and control the local water supply. Caesar attempts direct assault and fails. His forces take casualties and accomplish nothing. So he stops fighting and starts engineering. Caesar's legions dig channels to divert the river, build fortifications that cut off enemy access to water, and construct earthworks that turn Afranius and Petreius's strong position into a trap. Within 3 weeks, the enemy legions are dying of thirst while watching the Sicoris River flow past just outside their reach. They attempt to retreat. Caesar's cavalry surrounds them. They attempt to fight through. Caesar's veterans, tougher and more experienced from Gallic wars, slaughter the breakout attempts. Afranius and Petreius surrender on August 2nd, 49 BC. 7 legions, Rome's entire Spanish garrison, yield to Caesar without decisive battle. Again he offers clemency. Officers keep their ranks. Soldiers choose to join him or go home. Most join. By the time Caesar marches out of Spain, his army has grown from the original 6,000 who crossed the Rubicon to more than 40,000 hardened veterans. He returns to Rome in December, 7 months after leaving. The city welcomes him with genuine relief. No proscriptions happened. No mass executions. Caesar's rule has been remarkably bloodless compared to Sulla's dictatorship or Marius's purges. The common people remember that Caesar sponsored games, subsidized grain, and built public works. The Senate's conservative faction looks tyrannical by comparison. They fled, abandoned Rome, and accomplished nothing except prolonging the war. Caesar finally accepts the title of dictator, but only for 11 days and only to conduct elections legally. He gets himself elected consul for 48 BC through an assembly vote, giving him the legal authority he's been fighting for since crossing the Rubicon. With consulship comes immunity from prosecution, the ability to propose laws, and command authority that's constitutionally legitimate rather than based purely on military force. But he's still not the legal ruler of Rome in the way Pompey was before the Civil War. He's a consul elected under irregular circumstances by a Senate that was missing most of its members. Half the Republic's territories don't recognize his authority. Pompey sits in Greece with 9 full legions, complete control of the eastern provinces, and every resource of Rome's wealthiest regions. The treasury Caesar seized will barely cover 6 months of campaign costs. Meanwhile, Pompey can fund his forces indefinitely from Asia Minor's wealth. The war has reached a stalemate. Caesar controls Italy and the west. Pompey dominates Greece and the east. Neither can reach the other easily. Pompey's naval superiority prevents Caesar from crossing the Adriatic in force, while Caesar's control of Italy makes any Pompeian landing suicidal. Both sides spend winter recruiting, training, and preparing for the campaign that will actually decide the civil war. The common people suffer regardless of who wins. Trade has collapsed. Mediterranean commerce depends on stability, and civil war destroys stability. Pirates operate freely knowing Roman naval forces are fighting each other rather than protecting shipping. Grain prices spike. Cities that depended on Egyptian wheat face shortages. The war has killed relatively few soldiers so far, but is starving thousands of civilians through economic disruption. Caesar knows time favours Pompey. Every month of delay lets Pompey train more soldiers and strengthen eastern defences. The longer Caesar waits, the harder defeating Pompey becomes. He needs to force a decisive battle before Pompey's advantages become insurmountable. Winter storm season makes crossing the Adriatic near suicidal. No rational commander attempts it. Ships capsize. Entire fleets sink. Ancient navigation technology can't handle winter conditions. Any military force trying to cross during winter storms would drown before reaching Greece. Which is exactly why Caesar decides to cross in January 48 BC, during the absolute worst possible sailing conditions, because Pompey isn't expecting it, because surprise is worth more than safety, because every rule of warfare says you can't do this, and Caesar has built a career on proving warfare's rules wrong. He gathers ships at Brundisium and prepares for the most dangerous gamble of his life. Caesar owns exactly 12 warships and enough merchant vessels to transport maybe 20,000 soldiers if they pack in like cargo. Pompey's Admiral Bibulus patrols the Adriatic with a fleet 5 times that size. The mathematics of naval warfare are simple and brutal. Larger fleet wins, smaller fleet drowns. Roman naval doctrine since the Punic Wars has emphasized numerical superiority because ramming tactics require mass. January brings storms that experienced sailors won't navigate even in peacetime. Waves reach heights that swamp merchant vessels. Wind shifts unpredictably, turning favourable breezes into ship-killing gales within minutes. Ancient ships lack the keel design and rigging technology that later centuries will develop. They're glorified rowing boats with sails, adequate for summer Mediterranean crossings, death traps in winter conditions. Caesar orders 7 legions to board ships on January 4th, 48 BC. The soldiers, veterans of Gallic campaigns who faced Germanic warriors and Belgian fanatics, look at the churning Adriatic and question their general's sanity. Legionaries are land fighters. Most can't swim. Roman military training doesn't include water survival, because proper Roman tactics avoid sea battles entirely. You hire allies with naval expertise and let them handle ships while legions do actual fighting. But Caesar has no allied fleet. His naval forces consist of whatever vessels he could requisition from Italian ports, plus captured ships from earlier campaigns. The crews are merchant sailors pressed into military service. The officers are infantry commanders learning naval warfare through trial and catastrophic error. The crossing begins at night to avoid Bibulus's patrols. Merchant ships crammed with soldiers slip out of Brundisium under cover of darkness, navigating by stars when clouds permit and by pure luck when they don't. 7 legions means roughly 35,000 men theoretically, but Caesar can only transport 15,000 in the first wave. The rest, including Mark Antony commanding the reserves, must wait in Italy for ships to return. If Bibulus intercepts this first wave, the war ends. 3,500 years of naval warfare has taught one absolute lesson. Troop transports cannot fight warships. Soldiers packed onto merchant vessels have no defensive capability against naval rams. Bibulus just needs to find Caesar's fleet, and the entire invasion force drowns. The weather saves Caesar through sheer malevolence. Storms that should have sunk his fleet instead keep Bibulus's warships in port. The Pompeian admiral can't patrol during conditions that would destroy his own vessels. Caesar's transports struggle through waves that wash men overboard and split seams, losing ships to weather instead of enemy action. But the survivors reach the Albanian coast at Palest on January 5th. 15,000 men stumble onto Greek beaches, half drowned, separated from their supplies, and completely cut off from reinforcement. The transport ships, battered from the crossing, need immediate return to Italy to fetch Antony and the remaining legions. Caesar sends them back into the same storms that nearly killed them the first time. Bibulus, furious at being outmaneuvered, catches the returning transports. His warships run down the empty merchant vessels and burn them, every ship. 30 transports go up in flames while Caesar watches from the Greek shore. The admiral then establishes a blockade so tight that not even fishing boats can cross. Antony and 20,000 veterans are stuck in Italy, unable to reinforce Caesar. The 15,000 men who made it across are stranded with no supply line, no naval support, and no escape route. Pompey commands 9 full legions in Greece plus auxiliary forces from allied kingdoms. Caesar has 7 understrength legions, but only 15,000 actually made the crossing. The numerical advantage is worse than 2-1, approaching 3-1 when counting Pompey's allied forces. Any competent general with Pompey's advantages would crush Caesar immediately. Pompey hesitates. He's 59 years old and hasn't personally commanded in battle for years. His last campaign was in the east against Mithridates, and those victories came through subordinate commanders doing actual fighting while Pompey handled politics. He's famous, respected, called Magnus, but he's also cautious in ways that young Pompey never was. Age and comfort have made him careful. Caesar uses that hesitation to dig in. His soldiers, even exhausted from the crossing, immediately start building fortifications because that's what Roman legions do. They turn every camp into a fortress. Within 3 days of landing, Caesar controls a defensive perimeter strong enough that assaulting it would cost Pompey thousands of casualties. The strategic situation remains terrible for Caesar, but at least he's not going to be immediately overrun. The supply problem becomes critical within a week. Caesar's army needs grain, and Greece in January produces nothing. Local villages have winter stores, but not enough to feed 15,000 soldiers. Foraging parties range wider, stripping the countryside, making enemies of Greek civilians who don't care about Roman politics, but very much care about soldiers stealing their food. Caesar sends messages back to Italy, demanding Antony find some way across Bibulus's blockade. The messages themselves are dangerous. Sending ships through the blockade risks losing the messengers and ensuring Antony never receives orders. Caesar resorts to having individual soldiers swim across narrows, carrying messages in waterproof pouches, hoping some survive to reach Italy. Antony receives word in late January. He has 20,000 troops, no ships, and a Pompeian blockade that has explicit orders to burn anything attempting the crossing. The logical decision is waiting for spring when storms abate, and maybe the blockade weakens. Antony chooses the illogical option. He attempts the crossing anyway. February brings slightly better weather. Slightly. Bibulus maintains patrols, but winter conditions have exhausted his crews. Ships need constant maintenance. Sailors need rest. The blockade develops gaps as vessels rotate to port for repairs. Antony watches for patterns, identifies the weakest patrol window, and orders his forces aboard whatever ship survived Bibulus's earlier burning campaign. The crossing is a nightmare. Pompeian warships intercept part of Antony's fleet and sink several transports. Hundreds of soldiers drown, but the weather, still terrible by any rational sailing standard, again works in Caesar's favour by forcing Bibulus to choose between maintaining pursuit and preserving his own ships. The admiral chooses ship preservation, letting damaged transports escape rather than risk losing warships to storms. Antony reaches the coast north of Caesar's position with roughly 17,000 men. He lost 3,000 to weather and enemy action. The two forces are still separated by Pompey's army, positioned between them. If Pompey moves quickly, he can destroy one force before it reinforces the other. Pompey moves slowly. He consolidates his positions, ensures supply lines, and debates strategy with senatorial advisors who have military opinions but zero combat experience. The delay is only 3 days, but 3 days gives Caesar time to march north and Antony time to march south. They link up on February 10th, combining into a force of approximately 32,000 men, still outnumbered, still cut off from Italy, still without naval support, but unified and commanded by two of Rome's most aggressive generals instead of separated into vulnerable pieces. Pompey's strategic advantage is evaporating through his own caution. He had the numbers, the position, and the opportunity to crush Caesar's invasion force before it consolidated. Instead, he allowed a trapped enemy to reinforce, making the eventual battle far costlier than it needed to be. The two armies maneuver around western Greece through February and into March. Neither commander wants battle on unfavourable ground. Pompey seeks terrain that advantages his superior cavalry forces. Caesar needs terrain that neutralizes numerical disadvantages and prevents Pompey's cavalry from flanking his smaller army. They converge on Dyrrhachium, a coastal city that Pompey occupies with his forces. The city has fortifications, a harbour allowing naval resupply, and defensive advantages that make direct assault suicidal. Pompey's army camps outside the city walls with access to both urban supplies and their fortified position. Caesar attempts something unprecedented in Roman military history. He builds a siege wall around Pompey's larger force. The plan is insane by conventional standards. Sieges involve smaller forces defending against larger attackers, not smaller forces trying to contain larger defenders. But Caesar's logic is sound. Pompey won't attack aggressively, so Caesar can build fortifications faster than Pompey can disrupt construction. If successful, the wall will cut Pompey off from local forage, forcing him to rely entirely on naval resupply. The construction project becomes a race. Caesar's legions dig trenches, raise earthen ramparts, and build wooden palisades while Pompey's forces harass the work parties. The fortification line stretches approximately 15 miles in a massive arc from coast to coast, encompassing Pompey's entire position. It requires moving millions of cubic feet of earth, cutting thousands of trees, and maintaining defensive positions while building. Pompey responds by building his own counter-fortifications inside Caesar's wall. The result is surreal. Two armies both besieging and besieged, separated by parallel walls barely 100 yards apart in places. Soldiers on both sides can see each other working. Occasional skirmishes erupt when patrols meet between the walls. The fighting becomes a daily grind of small unit actions, cavalry probes, skirmisher exchanges. Sudden infantry clashes when work parties encounter each other. Nobody gains significant advantage, but casualties accumulate. Men die for 50 yards of rampart or 100 feet of trench. Supply becomes the decisive factor. Pompey's naval access keeps his army fed, though quality declines as foraging becomes impossible and everything comes by ship. Caesar's forces, cut off from maritime resupply, eat progressively worse rations. By April, they're consuming a bread substitute made from a root called cara that tastes like wood and provides minimal nutrition. Pompey's cavalry, vastly superior to Caesar's mounted forces, begins finding weak points in the siege wall. The 15-mile fortification is too long for Caesar's reduced forces to defend everywhere simultaneously. Pompey probes constantly, looking for the inevitable gap. The gap appears in late May at the southern end of Caesar's fortifications near the coast. Pompey's scouts identify a section where the wall hasn't quite reached the sea, leaving a narrow corridor between fortifications and water. Pompey masses forces for a breakout, planning to punch through this weak point and roll up Caesar's entire siege line from the flank. Caesar spots the build-up and rushes reinforcements, but he's reacting instead of dictating action. His forces arrive exhausted from forced marches. Pompey's troops are fresh and outnumber the defenders 3-1 at the breakout point. The battle for the southern wall begins before dawn on July 10th. Pompey's legions hit the fortification with overwhelming force, while cavalry sweeps around the incomplete section near the coast. Caesar's defenders hold initially, but weight of numbers tells. The wall breaks. Pompey's cavalry floods through, attacking Caesar's positions from behind while infantry pushes forward from the front. Caesar's 9th Legion, holding the collapsing southern section, panics. These are veterans who fought for Caesar in Gaul, men who survived Germanic ambushes and Belgian sieges, and they break. Soldiers throw down shields and run. Officers trying to rally them are trampled by their own men fleeing Pompey's advancing forces. The rout spreads. When one Roman legion breaks, adjacent units lose confidence. The 10th Legion sees the 9th running and begins withdrawing before they're even engaged. Caesar's entire southern position collapses in less than an hour. Pompey's forces pursue, but not aggressively. The cavalry could have turned the retreat into a massacre by cutting off escape routes, but Pompey orders controlled advance rather than all-out pursuit. His reasons are sound. Uncontrolled pursuit can lead to ambushes, and he doesn't want his cavalry overextending into potential traps. But caution costs him the chance to destroy Caesar's army entirely. Caesar loses nearly 1,000 men in the battle and subsequent retreat. 32 tribunes and centurions die, most trying to stop the panic. The survivors flee north, abandoning the entire southern fortification line that took months to construct. Pompey's army now controls the field and has broken out of Caesar's siege. For the first time since crossing the Rubicon, Caesar has suffered complete, undeniable defeat. His siege failed. His casualties are catastrophic by Roman standards. His army's morale is shattered. The invincible reputation he built through 9 years in Gaul and the Italian campaign has been destroyed in a single morning. Pompey's officers celebrate immediately. Senators who fled Rome and have been living in military camps for over a year finally see victory. Labienus, Caesar's former lieutenant who defected to Pompey before the civil war, argues for immediate pursuit to finish Caesar off. The conservative senators who engineered this entire conflict want Caesar's head literally on a pike in the forum. Pompey refuses to pursue aggressively. He argues that Caesar is still dangerous, that rushing after a trapped enemy could lead to ambush, that proper Roman generalship means consolidating victory before advancing. His caution is reasonable from one perspective. Caesar has a reputation for pulling victory from desperate situations, and overconfidence has destroyed better generals than Pompey. But from another perspective, Pompey just wasted the opportunity that every general dreams about. The chance to annihilate a defeated enemy army while it's demoralized and running. Caesar's forces are strung out in retreat, exhausted and psychologically broken. A hard pursuit by Pompey's superior cavalry could have cut them apart. Caesar retreats inland into Thessaly, putting distance between his army and Pompey's victorious forces. The march is grim. Soldiers who bragged about never losing now trudge in silence. Officers who commanded with confidence now question every decision. The army that conquered Gaul and Italy has been beaten by the very forces it was supposed to destroy. Desertion becomes a real concern. Small groups slip away at night, heading for ports or attempting to reach Italy. Caesar orders executions for deserters caught, a punishment he rarely used before Dyrrhachium. The executions work only partially. They stop mass desertions but create resentment among soldiers who expected better treatment. The strategic situation has reversed completely. Pompey now holds all advantages: superior numbers, superior morale, control of supply lines, and momentum. Caesar commands a defeated army, cut off from reinforcement, operating in hostile territory. His only advantage is Pompey's caution. The older general refuses to take risks that might end the war quickly. The chase continues through July. Pompey follows but doesn't close for battle. Caesar retreats but looks for opportunities to reverse his fortunes. Both armies march through Greek countryside that's been stripped bare by months of military foraging. Civilian populations flee rather than face either army. The war has become a desert where it passes. Caesar's intelligence network reports that Pompey's senatorial advisors are already dividing Caesar's property. They're assigning his estates, debating who gets which provinces after Caesar is executed, and arguing over whether to allow his family to live in exile or execute them for treason. The senators treat Caesar as already defeated, just waiting for the final battle to make it official. That arrogance gives Caesar a sliver of hope. Overconfident enemies make mistakes. Pompey's forces have stopped treating him as dangerous and started treating him as beaten. If Caesar can force battle on his terms, surprise might compensate for numerical disadvantage. The armies converge on Pharsalus in early August. Caesar needs battle desperately. His supply situation is critical. His army is degrading daily through desertion and hunger, and continuing retreat means slow disintegration. Pompey doesn't need battle. Time favours him. Caesar's position worsens every day, and waiting costs Pompey nothing. But Pompey's senatorial advisors, flushed with victory at Dyrrhachium and impatient to return to Rome, pressure him to finish this. They mock his caution, question his courage, and suggest that maybe he's not the general his reputation claims. The pressure is political and psychological rather than military, but it works. Pompey agrees to offer battle near Pharsalus. On August 9th, 48 BC, both armies deploy on open ground. Pompey commands roughly 45,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry. Caesar has 22,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. The numerical advantage is worse than 2-1, and Pompey's cavalry superiority is 7-1. Every tactical calculation favours Pompey. Every strategic assessment predicts Caesar's destruction. The conservative senators are already celebrating. Some have brought servants to the battlefield to pack Caesar's possessions after the victory. Caesar has one advantage they're not counting on. He knows Pompey. They were allies for years, fought together, planned campaigns together. Caesar understands how Pompey thinks, what tactics he favours, and what his plan will be before Pompey's officers finish receiving their orders. The battle that will decide Rome's future is about to begin, and only one of these generals is treating it like a battle he might lose. Dawn on August 9th breaks clear and hot over the Thessalian plain. Both armies deploy in standard triple-line formation, first line to engage, second to reinforce, third to exploit breakthroughs or cover retreat. Pompey anchors his left flank on the Enipeus River, preventing Caesar from flanking that direction. His right flank extends into open ground where his 7,000 cavalry mass like a storm waiting to break. Caesar positions his weakest legion, the 9th that broke at Dyrrhachium, on the left where they'll face minimal action. His best troops, the veteran 10th Legion, hold the right opposite Pompey's cavalry concentration. Standard Roman doctrine would place the 10th in centre for maximum impact against enemy infantry. Caesar is violating doctrine deliberately. Pompey's plan is textbook perfect. His massed cavalry will sweep Caesar's pathetic 1,000 horsemen aside, then wheel left and attack Caesar's legions from behind while Pompey's superior infantry pins them frontally. It's a double envelopment that's worked since Cannae. The tactics are sound. The numbers support it. There's no reasonable way Caesar can counter 7-1 cavalry superiority. Except Caesar creates an unreasonable counter. He pulls cohorts from his third line, roughly 2,000 men, and positions them behind his cavalry at an angle perpendicular to the main battle line. These troops receive specific orders. Wait until Pompey's cavalry breaks through, then attack them directly with javelins aimed at faces rather than shields. The positioning is invisible to Pompey's observers. The third line appears normal until you count closely, and nobody on Pompey's staff is counting cohorts during pre-battle deployment. The hidden fourth line is Caesar's entire tactical plan. Everything else is set up for this one surprise. If it fails, he loses. If it works, Pompey's advantage evaporates. Morning wears into midday. The heat becomes oppressive. Soldiers in full armour sweat through their tunics. Officers walk the lines checking equipment, offering encouragement, ensuring formations stay tight. Pompey's senators, positioned safely behind the army, are already arguing about which of Caesar's villas they'll claim. Afranius wants the estate at Baiae. Scipio demands the property in Tusculum. They're dividing spoils before the battle begins. Caesar addresses his troops briefly. No grand speeches. His men are professionals who know the stakes. They're outnumbered, exhausted, and fighting to survive. Eloquence won't change mathematics. But Caesar reminds them of one fact. Pompey's soldiers are recruits and conscripts while they're veterans of Gaul. Quality counts more than quantity when experience gaps are this wide. Pompey orders advance around noon. His infantry moves forward in perfect formation, shields locked, lines dressed. 45,000 men stepping in unison create a ground tremor felt a mile away. The discipline is impressive. These aren't the panicked recruits Caesar faced in Spain. Pompey has trained them properly, and they're advancing like the professional Roman army they are. Caesar's infantry holds position. Roman tactics traditionally have both sides advancing to meet in the middle, but Caesar lets Pompey's forces close the distance alone. His reasoning is brutal. Let the enemy exhaust themselves running across open ground in August heat while wearing armour. Every yard Pompey's infantry advances is energy spent before combat even begins. Pompey's line covers 300 yards at steady march, 200 yards, 100 yards. His front ranks are breathing hard from the distance and heat. Caesar's troops, fresh from standing still, prepare to receive the charge. The lines collide with a crash of shields and screaming soldiers. The sound of Roman legions engaging is distinctive. Bronze hitting bronze, men grunting with effort, officers shouting orders barely audible over combat noise. The fighting is vicious immediately. Pompey's numerical advantage means his lines are deeper, letting fresh troops rotate forward while fatigued soldiers fall back. Caesar's thinner lines have no depth for rotation. Every man is committed from the start. Pompey's centre begins pushing Caesar's line backward. Inches become feet, become yards. The pressure is relentless. Caesar's infantry is being ground down by superior numbers exactly as Pompey's plan requires. If the lines break, the battle is over. But the infantry fight is a distraction. The real battle is about to happen on the flank where cavalry masses. Pompey's 7,000 horsemen advance in a formation so dense that individual riders are barely visible. It's a wall of horseflesh and armed men, utterly overwhelming against Caesar's 1,000 cavalry. Pompey's cavalry commander is Labienus, Caesar's former lieutenant who defected. Labienus knows Caesar's tactics, anticipates his moves, and commands forces sufficient to crush anything Caesar might attempt. Caesar's cavalry doesn't even try to hold. They engage briefly, exchange a few javelin volleys, then retreat exactly as Pompey predicted. Labienus's horsemen pursue, wheeling left to get behind Caesar's infantry line and complete the envelopment. Victory is minutes away. The hidden fourth line reveals itself. 2,000 legionaries step from behind Caesar's retreating cavalry and form up directly in Pompey's cavalry path. They're not in defensive formation. They're arrayed for assault, standing in loose order with javelins ready. Labienus sees them too late to stop his charge. 7,000 cavalrymen are committed to the attack, momentum carrying them forward. The distance closes to 50 yards, 40, 30. Caesar's fourth line throws javelins aimed upward at 45-degree angles, targeting faces instead of shields. The tactic is specifically designed to counter cavalry. Horsemen carry shields that protect torsos but leave faces exposed. A javelin coming up from below at face height forces the rider to choose between maintaining control of their horse or protecting their face. Pompey's aristocratic cavalry, young nobles who joined for glory and command positions rather than hard fighting, face weapons aimed at their faces. These men aren't professional soldiers. They're senators' sons, wealthy landowners, and political allies given cavalry commands because Romans consider cavalry less important than infantry. Most have never been in serious combat. None have faced attack designed specifically to maim them personally. The front ranks panic. Riders pull back on reins, trying to avoid javelins rather than maintaining the charge. The formation compresses as rear ranks pile into front ranks that have stopped advancing. Horses collide, riders fall. The organised cavalry charge becomes a confused mass of men and animals trying to avoid the deadly rain of javelins still arcing up from Caesar's fourth line. Caesar's infantry in the fourth line doesn't stop at javelin range. They advance with swords drawn, attacking the disrupted cavalry formation directly. Roman legionaries are trained to fight cavalry by targeting horses rather than riders. Cripple the mount and the rider becomes infantry at best, corpse at worst. The tactic works brilliantly against cavalry that's already panicked and disordered. Labienus tries to rally his forces, but cavalry that breaks formation cannot reform under fire. Individual riders flee. Small groups attempt to withdraw. The entire right wing of Pompey's cavalry disintegrates not from being defeated in combat, but from refusing to face personal danger. These aristocrats joined the army expecting to command, not to die. When death becomes immediate rather than abstract, they run. Caesar's fourth line, having shattered Pompey's cavalry, now does exactly what that cavalry was supposed to do: wheel left and attack Pompey's infantry from behind. 2,000 men hit the flank of Pompey's battle line while Caesar's main force presses from the front. Pompey's legions find themselves attacked from two directions simultaneously. Roman military training emphasizes frontline combat. Legionaries drill endlessly in maintaining shield walls and fighting the enemy directly ahead. Being attacked from behind breaks every tactical principle they've learned. Formations designed for forward fighting cannot easily pivot to address flank assault. The rear ranks, meant to reinforce forward pressure, instead face enemies coming from the wrong direction. Pompey's centre begins to waver. Soldiers glance backward, seeing the disaster developing on their flank. Officers scream orders, but battlefield noise drowns out commands. The cohesion that makes Roman legions unstoppable starts fragmenting into individual units fighting separate battles. Caesar commits his entire third line, the reserve he's held back until this moment. Fresh troops pour into combat against Pompey's forces that have been fighting for over an hour. The psychological impact multiplies the physical advantage. Pompey's soldiers see fresh enemies arriving and wonder where Pompey's reserves are. The answer, Pompey has no reserves because he committed everything to the initial plan, doesn't reach the common legionaries who just know they're exhausted and facing fresh opponents. The wavering becomes a crack. Pompey's left flank, still relatively intact, sees the centre collapsing and begins withdrawing to avoid being surrounded. Orderly withdrawal becomes general retreat when adjacent units follow suit. The retreat becomes a rout when Caesar's cavalry, rallied after their initial flight, pursue the breaking formations. Pompey stands on a small hill behind his lines, watching his perfect plan disintegrate. His numerical superiority meant nothing. His cavalry advantage evaporated. His infantry, brave and well-trained, cannot hold against attacks from multiple directions. The battle is lost. He removes his general's cloak and insignia. Wearing them makes him a target, and Pompey recognizes that defeat is total. He rides from the battlefield not in panicked flight but in controlled withdrawal, heading for his camp where hopefully some forces remain for evacuation. His camp is already being overrun. Caesar's troops, scenting total victory, bypassed organized resistance and went straight for the supply trains and command tents. Soldiers loot Pompey's personal belongings. Officers search for important documents. The senators who were dividing Caesar's property hours earlier are now fleeing for their lives. Pompey doesn't stop at the camp. He rides through it, collects a small escort of loyal cavalry, and continues east toward the coast. His immediate goal is survival. Strategic considerations can wait until he's not fleeing a battlefield. The slaughter on the plain is comprehensive but not total. Caesar's veterans, having fought all morning and won decisively, begin accepting surrenders rather than killing everyone they encounter. Pompey's soldiers throw down weapons and beg for mercy. Caesar's officers grant it, remembering their general's clemency policy. The killing stops being a battle and becomes prisoner processing. 15,000 of Pompey's soldiers die. Another 20,000 surrender. The rest scatter, fleeing toward Larissa or trying to reach the coast. Caesar loses approximately 200 men. The exchange ratio is 75-1, one of the most lopsided victories in Roman military history. But the human cost extends beyond battlefield casualties. Pompey's army contained dozens of senators, hundreds of equestrians, and thousands of Italian citizens. These are Romans killing Romans, not foreign enemies. Caesar walks among the dead after the battle and allegedly weeps, saying that his enemies forced this outcome by refusing negotiation. Whether the tears are genuine or political, theatre matters less than their effect. Caesar positions himself as the reluctant victor, the man who wanted peace but was driven to war by stubborn opponents. Pompey becomes the villain who fled while his soldiers died. The narrative is propaganda, but effective propaganda shapes reality more than truth does. Caesar's clemency policy continues with the prisoners. Officers keep their ranks if they swear loyalty. Common soldiers choose between joining Caesar's legions or going home. Most join. They're professional soldiers who need employment, and Caesar pays better than Pompey did. The army that destroyed Pompey's forces swells with his captured troops. Pompey's camp yields intelligence beyond mere supplies. Documents reveal which senators actively supported the war, which kingdoms sent aid, and where Pompey's remaining forces are stationed. Caesar's staff spends the night after battle reading through captured correspondence, building target lists for the next phase of the war. Because the war isn't over. Pompey escaped, and while his main army is destroyed, he still commands resources throughout the eastern Mediterranean. He has legions in Africa. He has allies in Asia Minor. He has the entire treasury of Egypt theoretically available if he can reach Alexandria and claim it. Caesar cannot rest after Pharsalus. Victory in one battle doesn't end a civil war, it just changes the strategic situation. He must pursue Pompey relentlessly, never allowing time for regrouping or recruiting fresh forces. Every day of delay gives Pompey opportunity to rebuild. But Caesar's forces are exhausted. They've marched hundreds of miles, fought through sieges, survived near starvation, and just completed a battle that lasted hours in August heat. Pushing them into immediate pursuit risks destroying the army through fatigue as surely as Pompey could have destroyed it through combat. Caesar compromises. He rests his main forces for 3 days while sending cavalry ahead to track Pompey's retreat. The cavalry reports that Pompey is heading for the coast, presumably to take ship to Egypt or Asia Minor. His escort is small, maybe 100 men. The great general who commanded 9 legions is now a fugitive with a bodyguard. The senators who survived Pharsalus scatter. Some flee to Cato in Africa, where Pompeian forces remain intact. Others try reaching Spain. A few attempt negotiating with Caesar, offering surrender in exchange for clemency. Caesar accepts the surrenders while tracking who fled. Those who refuse his mercy become targets for later prosecution. Cicero, who reluctantly joined Pompey's side but never participated in combat, survives the battle and immediately opens communication with Caesar. The philosophical statesman's letters are masterpieces of political fence-sitting, simultaneously explaining why he opposed Caesar while suggesting he never truly supported Pompey. Caesar, recognizing Cicero's value as a neutral voice who can legitimize the regime, grants full pardon. The news from Pharsalus spreads across the Mediterranean faster than ancient communication should allow. Merchant ships carry word. Survivors spread stories. Within 2 weeks, every major city knows that Pompey's army has been annihilated and Caesar is now militarily unstoppable. Client kings and provincial governors face immediate decisions: support the winning side or remain loyal to constitutional legitimacy. Most choose winning side. Letters pledging support for Caesar arrive from Asia Minor, Syria, and even from kingdoms that previously supplied Pompey with troops. Political loyalty lasts exactly as long as military power supports it. Egypt faces the most difficult decision. King Ptolemy XIII is barely 14 years old, controlled by advisors who've been managing the kingdom since his father died. Egypt has been Rome's quasi-protectorate for decades, maintaining independence by playing Roman factions against each other. Ptolemy's advisors previously supported Pompey because he seemed likely to win. Now that calculation has changed, Pompey doesn't know Egyptian politics have shifted when he arrives at Alexandria in late August. He expects sanctuary based on past relationships. His father supported Ptolemy's grandfather, and Roman-Egyptian ties run deep. His ship approaches Alexandria's harbour, displaying flags requesting diplomatic reception. The reception comes from a small boat carrying Ptolemy's advisors. They invite Pompey to come ashore for formal welcome. Pompey, exhausted from fleeing across half of Greece and desperate for safe harbour, accepts. The boat reaches the shallows. Pompey stands to disembark. Septimius, a Roman officer who previously served under Pompey but now works for Ptolemy, draws his sword and stabs Pompey from behind. The attack is so sudden that Pompey barely has time to pull his toga over his face before multiple assailants cut him down. The man called Magnus, Rome's greatest general, dies in ankle-deep Egyptian water, killed by subordinates turned assassins. The murderers cut off Pompey's head and preserve it in brine. They take his signet ring as proof. The body is left on the beach for Egyptian workers to burn. Ptolemy's advisors, led by the eunuch Pothinus and the rhetorician Theodotus, believe they've made a brilliant political move: eliminate Caesar's enemy, present the head as a gift, and secure Egypt's position with Rome's new master. Caesar arrives in Alexandria 3 days later, pursuing Pompey with 4,000 troops. He's bringing a small force because he expects negotiation rather than combat. Egyptian officials greet him with Pompey's head presented in a jar and his signet ring on a cushion. Caesar's reaction surprises them. He weeps. Whether genuine grief for a former ally or calculated political theatre, the tears serve multiple purposes. They position Caesar as the merciful victor mourning Rome's loss rather than celebrating an enemy's death. They demonstrate that Caesar values Roman lives, even opponents' lives, more than foreign allies value Roman alliances. They make Ptolemy's advisors look like barbaric opportunists rather than sophisticated politicians. The weeping continues long enough that everyone present feels uncomfortable. Then Caesar accepts the ring, refuses to look at the head, and orders a proper funeral for Pompey's remains. The message to Egypt and the watching Mediterranean world is clear. Caesar respects Roman dignity even in death, and those who violate that dignity are not friends but problems to be solved. Ptolemy's advisors realize too late that they've miscalculated catastrophically. They murdered a Roman proconsul believing it would please Caesar. Instead, they've demonstrated that Egypt considers Roman lives cheap, which makes them dangerous rather than useful. Their attempt to curry favour has marked them as expendable barbarians in Caesar's eyes. Caesar compounds their error by immediately involving himself in Egypt's internal politics. Ptolemy XIII is locked in dynastic struggle with his sister wife Cleopatra XXI. The sister part is genealogy, the wife part is Egyptian royal tradition, and the struggle part is murderous politics that makes Roman civil war look civilized. Cleopatra has been driven into exile by Ptolemy's advisors, who fear her intelligence and political skill. Caesar announces he will arbitrate the dispute between the siblings. The announcement is purest arrogance. Egypt is a sovereign kingdom, not a Roman province, and Caesar has no legal authority to dictate Egyptian governance. But he has 4,000 Roman soldiers in Alexandria, and sovereignty is theoretical while military occupation is practical. Ptolemy's advisors, already furious about Caesar's reaction to Pompey's murder, now face Roman interference in internal matters. They begin mobilizing Egypt's army, and Alexandria's notoriously violent mob. The city has a population approaching 500,000, and the common people hate Roman arrogance with passion, born from decades of watching Romans treat Egypt as a subject state while pretending it's an ally. Caesar has made a fatal mistake. He's turned what should have been a brief diplomatic visit into occupation, and he's done so with 4,000 troops against a city that can mobilize tens of thousands. Pharsalus proved his tactical genius. Alexandria will test whether that genius extends to situations where military force is insufficient and political judgment matters more. The trap is already closing, and Caesar doesn't recognize it yet. Cleopatra reaches Caesar through deception that later sources will romanticize into the carpet story, though the actual method matters less than the audacity. She smuggles herself past Ptolemy's guards into the royal quarter, where Caesar has established headquarters. The woman who enters is 21 years old, fluent in 9 languages including Latin, educated in philosophy and mathematics, and desperate enough to risk execution by approaching a foreign general without authorization. Caesar, 52 and recently victorious at Pharsalus, meets her that evening. Whether seduction happens immediately or develops over subsequent days, the political calculation is instant. Cleopatra represents legitimate claim to Egypt's throne without the advisors who murdered Pompey. Supporting her gives Caesar moral justification for interference, while eliminating the officials who demonstrated contempt for Roman lives. The alliance forms before the first conversation ends. Ptolemy's advisors learn of the meeting within hours. Palace servants talk, guards report. Alexandria's rumour network operates faster than official communication channels. Pothinus, the chief eunuch who orchestrated Pompey's murder, recognizes that Caesar siding with Cleopatra means his own death. The advisor who thought killing Pompey would gain favour has instead engineered his own destruction. The Egyptian army mobilizes immediately. 20,000 soldiers converge on Alexandria from garrisons throughout the delta. Pothinus and his co-conspirator Achillas, who commands Egypt's military forces, plan to trap Caesar in the palace quarter before reinforcements can arrive from his legions still in Asia Minor. 4,000 Roman soldiers cannot hold an entire city against 20,000 Egyptian troops, plus whatever mob forces the population provides. Caesar realizes the danger too late. He's occupied the royal palace, a defensible position, but he's cut off from Alexandria's harbour and surrounded by a hostile city. The palace complex is large enough to house his 4,000 men but has limited food stores. Wells provide water, but everything else must come from outside. Achilles' forces control the streets between palace and harbour, preventing naval resupply. The siege begins in October 48 BC. Egyptian forces don't assault the palace directly. That would cost thousands of casualties against Roman defensive positions. Instead, they blockade it, cutting off supplies and waiting for starvation to force surrender. Alexandria's mob joins the effort enthusiastically, seeing this as opportunity to humiliate the Romans who've treated Egypt as subordinate for generations. Caesar's 4,000 troops fortify the palace quarter, turning royal gardens into defensive perimeters and marble colonnades into fighting positions. Luxury architecture designed for pharaonic splendor becomes military fortification. The Romans are professional soldiers who know how to maximize defensive terrain, but they're still outnumbered 5-1 and trapped. The naval situation determined everything. Caesar controls some ships in Alexandria's harbour, maybe 40 vessels total. Achilles commands the Egyptian fleet of 72 warships. If those Egyptian ships remain operational, Caesar cannot receive reinforcements or escape if the siege becomes untenable. Roman tactical doctrine is clear. Deny the enemy naval assets. Caesar orders his ships to attack the Egyptian fleet at anchor. The assault succeeds partially. His forces burn or sink several Egyptian vessels before being driven off. But 40 ships cannot destroy 72, and Achilles' fleet remains combat effective. Caesar makes the brutal decision: burn everything. His soldiers torch the entire harbour district, setting fire to docks, warehouses, and every ship in reach regardless of ownership. The fire spreads beyond the harbour. Alexandria is dense with buildings, and October winds push flames into the city proper. The Library of Alexandria sits near the harbour district. Whether the fire reaches the library itself becomes historical controversy. Later sources claim huge manuscript losses. Contemporary accounts are ambiguous. What's certain is that Caesar's decision to burn the fleet also burned significant portions of Alexandria, killing hundreds of civilians and destroying property worth millions of sesterces. The population's hatred intensifies. Before, Caesar faced political opposition from Ptolemy's advisors. Now he faces popular fury from common Alexandrians whose homes and businesses just burned. The mob attacks any Roman court outside the palace perimeter. Bodies appear in the streets. The siege transforms from military operation into urban warfare driven by genuine rage. Caesar attempts seizing Pharos Island, which controls Alexandria's harbour entrance. The island's lighthouse, one of the ancient world's wonders, provides strategic observation over the entire harbour approach. Holding Pharos means controlling who enters or leaves Alexandria by sea. Caesar's forces assault across a causeway connecting island to mainland, fighting street by street against Egyptian defenders. The battle for Pharos becomes a grinding nightmare. Buildings must be cleared individually. Every alley could hide ambushes. Civilians mix with combatants, making target identification impossible. Roman soldiers trained for open-field combat in Gaul struggle with urban warfare in an unfamiliar city. The fighting lasts 3 days before Caesar's troops secure the island, losing hundreds of men for a strategic position that should have been taken in hours. Reinforcements finally arrive in November. The 27th Legion shipped from Asia Minor plus allied forces from Pergamum and Syria. Approximately 8,000 fresh troops enter Alexandria's harbour and fight through to reinforce Caesar's besieged position. The numerical balance shifts from 5-1 Egyptian advantage to rough parity. Achilles recognises that the siege has failed. With reinforcements continuing to arrive, Caesar's position strengthens daily while Egyptian forces cannot easily increase. The Egyptian commander begins considering negotiated settlement before Roman numerical superiority becomes overwhelming. But Ptolemy's court politics intervene. Pothinus and Achilles quarrel over strategy. The eunuch wants to negotiate with Caesar, reasoning that some concessions beat total defeat. Achilles argues for continued warfare, believing Egyptian forces can still win if they maintain pressure. The dispute becomes personal, then murderous. Pothinus attempts having Achilles assassinated. The assassination fails, and Achilles responds by having Pothinus arrested. Caesar solves the problem by executing Pothinus himself. The eunuch who ordered Pompey's murder dies on Caesar's orders, eliminating a diplomatic obstacle and sending a message to Egyptian leadership that murdering Roman officials carries consequences. The execution is legally questionable. Pothinus is an Egyptian official in Egyptian territory, but Caesar stopped caring about legal niceties when he crossed the Rubicon. Arsinoe, Ptolemy and Cleopatra's younger sister, escapes the palace and joins Achilles. She's 15 years old, ambitious, and sees opportunity in the chaos. Achilles recognizes her value as an alternative royal figurehead. If Ptolemy and Cleopatra are both compromised by association with Caesar, Arsinoe represents untainted Egyptian resistance. He proclaims her queen and continues the war in her name. The alliance lasts barely a month. Arsinoe, despite her youth, understands that Achilles is using her as a puppet. She has him assassinated and takes direct command of Egyptian forces. A 15-year-old girl is now Caesar's primary military opponent in Alexandria, commanding an army larger than his own and supported by a population that hates Rome. Ptolemy, trapped in the palace with Caesar and increasingly irrelevant to actual events, requests release to join his army and negotiate peace. Caesar agrees, calculating that Ptolemy's presence might moderate Egyptian forces. The calculation proves catastrophically wrong. Ptolemy reaches his army and immediately orders intensified attacks, betraying whatever agreement he made with Caesar. The fighting escalates through December and into January 47 BC. Roman reinforcements continue arriving, but so do Egyptian reinforcements from Upper Egypt and Libya. The siege becomes a war of attrition neither side can afford. Caesar needs to end this and move on to other fronts. Pompey's sons are raising forces in Africa and Spain. Staying trapped in Alexandria wastes time and resources while his enemies regroup. The naval battle of Alexandria decides the siege. Caesar masses every available ship, perhaps 80 vessels by now, and attacks the Egyptian fleet directly. The fighting is brutal, ships ramming each other, marines boarding and fighting deck to deck, burning vessels, drifting and spreading fire. Roman naval tactics emphasize boarding actions since Roman soldiers are superior to Egyptian marines in close combat. The strategy works. Egyptian ships are captured or sunk. By evening, Caesar controls Alexandria's harbour completely. Ptolemy attempts escaping by ship when the naval battle turns against Egypt. His vessel, overloaded with refugees from the defeated fleet, sinks in the harbour. The 14-year-old king drowns along with hundreds of soldiers and courtiers. Whether the ship's sinking is accident, sabotage, or panic-induced overloading becomes another historical mystery. What matters is that Ptolemy XIII is dead, and Cleopatra's main rival for Egypt's throne is gone. The Egyptian army disintegrates after Ptolemy's death. Arsinoe is captured trying to reach the delta. The common soldiers, having fought for months in a losing cause, surrender en masse when their king dies and their commander is taken prisoner. Alexandria's siege ends not with dramatic assault but with exhaustion and collapse. Caesar's casualties in the Alexandrian War exceed 1,000 dead and several thousand wounded, higher than his losses at Pharsalus against a larger and more professional force. Urban warfare against a hostile population is more costly than open battle against trained legions. The victory is complete but expensive. Bought with blood and time, Caesar could have spent consolidating control elsewhere. Cleopatra becomes Egypt's undisputed ruler with Caesar's military backing. She's pregnant with his child, a fact that becomes politically significant once the boy is born. Caesar will never officially acknowledge Caesarion as his son. Roman law forbids citizens from marrying foreigners, and acknowledging a foreign bastard creates succession complications. But everyone knows the child parentage, and Cleopatra ensures the knowledge spreads. Caesar leaves Egypt in March 47 BC, after 6 months trapped in a siege he should have avoided. The entire Alexandrian episode was unnecessary. Pompey was already dead, Egypt was not strategically critical, and inserting himself into Egyptian dynastic politics gained nothing except a pregnant mistress and thousands of dead soldiers. The campaign demonstrates Caesar's greatest weakness, overconfidence leading to situations where tactical brilliance must rescue him from strategic stupidity. But he survived, and Egypt is now firmly in his camp. Cleopatra's resources, including Egyptian grain and treasury, support Caesar's war effort. The alliance will last until Caesar's assassination and beyond, with Cleopatra later becoming Antony's partner in the next round of Roman civil wars. From Alexandria, Caesar marches to Asia Minor where Pharsalus, son of Mithridates the Great, has invaded Roman territory. Pharsalus saw Rome's civil war as opportunity to reclaim his father's kingdom and has defeated Roman forces sent against him. He's conquered Pontus, Armenia Minor, and parts of Cappadocia, undoing Pompey's eastern settlement and threatening Rome's control of Asia Minor. Caesar arrives with a small force. Most of his legions are still consolidating Egypt or heading to Africa where the war continues. He has approximately 15,000 men against Pharsalus' 20,000, and his troops are exhausted from the Alexandrian campaign. Normal Roman doctrine would involve careful preparation, scouting, and choosing optimal battle conditions. Caesar attacks immediately. The Battle of Zela lasts 4 hours from initial engagement to Pharsalus' complete defeat. Caesar's legions, despite being outnumbered and tired, simply overwhelm Pharsalus' forces through superior discipline and experience. The engagement is so one-sided that it barely qualifies as battle, more a demonstration of the gap between professional Roman legions and Oriental armies. Caesar's report to the Senate in Rome consists of 3 words: Veni, vidi, vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. The message is both factually accurate and calculated propaganda. It portrays the Asia Minor campaign as effortless, reinforcing Caesar's image as invincible general, while minimizing the difficulty and implying that defeating Caesar's enemies is trivially easy. But the war still isn't over. Pompey's supporters have consolidated in Africa under Cato, Scipio, and Metellus Scipio. They've allied with King Juba of Numidia, who provides both troops and resources. The Pompeian forces in Africa number roughly 60,000 men, larger than anything Pompey commanded at Pharsalus. Cato's presence gives them moral authority. They represent the Senate's legitimate government in exile, the constitutional resistance to Caesar's tyranny. Caesar cannot ignore Africa. While Pompeian forces control territory close to Italy, the civil war remains unfinished. Trade routes are disrupted. Grain shipments from Africa to Rome have stopped. The political legitimacy contest continues, 2 governments claiming to be Rome's true authority, each denouncing the other as criminal. He returns to Italy briefly in September 47 BC, celebrating multiple triumphs for victories in Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa. The celebrations are magnificent, displaying captured treasures and parading defeated enemies. But they're also controversial. Triumphs traditionally celebrate foreign victories, not civil war. Celebrating victory over other Romans violates the spirit of the triumph, even if Caesar technically avoided making it explicit. More important than triumphs is reorganization. Caesar's legions are scattered across the Mediterranean. Some guard Gaul, others hold Spain. His best troops are exhausted from continuous campaigning. He needs to consolidate forces, rest veterans, recruit replacements, and prepare for the African campaign. The consolidation reveals problems. Veterans who've fought since Gaul want land grants and retirement. They've served far beyond normal terms, survived countless battles, and expect rewards. Caesar promises land distributions but cannot deliver immediately. There's insufficient public land available, and confiscating private property would create more enemies. The promises keep soldiers loyal, but implementation is postponed. Mutinies erupt in Italy among legions waiting for transport to Africa. The 10th Legion, Caesar's most trusted unit, demands immediate discharge and payment. Officers lose control. Soldiers threaten to march on Rome itself to seize what they're owed. Caesar's response is characteristic. He arrives in person, addresses the mutineers, grants some demands while postponing others, and shames them into returning to duty by calling them citizens instead of soldiers. The calculated insult, implying they're no longer military forces under his command, works because these men's entire identity is being Caesar's soldiers. The mutiny suppresses, but the underlying issues remain. Caesar is running out of money and land to reward loyalty. His clemency policy, while politically brilliant, is expensive. Pardoned enemies don't contribute to war funding, and maintaining enormous armies costs fortunes. The treasury seized in 49 BC is nearly exhausted. Egypt provides some relief, but Cleopatra's resources support Roman armies already in the east, not operations in Africa. Caesar sails to Africa in December 47 BC with 6 legions. The crossing is difficult. Winter storms again threaten his fleet, and ships scatter. Caesar lands near Hadrumetum with barely 3,000 troops, his main forces delayed by weather. He's repeating the Dyrrhachium mistake, arriving with insufficient forces in hostile territory, but this time he knows the risks and accepts them because surprise is worth more than safety. The African campaign immediately goes wrong. Caesar's first engagement against Scipio's forces is a defeat. His outnumbered troops withdraw under pressure, taking casualties and losing ground. Juba's Numidian cavalry proves as effective as expected. Fast, skilled, and devastating against isolated Roman units. The terrain favours cavalry operations, and Caesar's forces are infantry-heavy. Local populations support Pompey's faction. Africa was Pompey's recruiting ground for years, and the common people remember his generosity. They see Caesar as the aggressor who destroyed constitutional government. Supply lines become nightmares. Every foraging party faces ambush. Every supply convoy needs escort. And the African interior is hostile in ways that drain resources. Caesar spends 2 months manoeuvring without decisive battle. He's waiting for the rest of his legions to arrive and trying to separate Scipio from Juba. The Numidian king's forces roughly equal Scipio's Roman legions in size, so together they outnumber Caesar 2-1. If Caesar can force Scipio to fight alone, the odds become manageable. Intelligence reports reveal tensions between Scipio and Juba. The Roman commander resents depending on a barbarian king. Juba considers the Pompeians ungrateful for his support. Caesar's agents exploit the tensions, spreading rumours that each side plans to betray the other. The psychological operation succeeds partially. Juba and Scipio maintain alliance but with increased suspicion. The armies converge near Thapsus in February 46 BC. Scipio's forces occupy a fortified position with Juba's cavalry protecting the flanks. Caesar's legions, now reinforced to roughly 40,000 men, face approximately 50,000 combined Pompeian and Numidian troops. The numbers still favour Scipio, but the gap has closed enough that superior Roman tactics might compensate. Caesar begins building siege works around Thapsus, attempting to cut Scipio off from supplies. The strategy worked against Pompey at Dyrrhachium until it failed, and Caesar hopes for better results in Africa. But his veterans, remembering Dyrrhachium's disaster, are nervous about prolonged siege operations against superior numbers. Scipio moves to break the siege before it completes. He attacks Caesar's siege lines with his full force, attempting to smash through before encirclement becomes total. The assault is competent, well coordinated, and hits Caesar's positions hard. For several hours, the battle's outcome is genuinely uncertain. Then Scipio's inexperience shows. He commits his reserves too early, trying to overwhelm Caesar's defence through weight of numbers. Caesar, holding his third line back as always, waits until Scipio's forces are fully committed and exhausted. Then he unleashes his reserves into Scipio's exposed flanks. The Pompeian line collapses catastrophically. What was organised assault becomes panicked rout within minutes. Caesar's veterans, angry from months of difficult campaigning and remembering every comrade who died in this endless civil war, refuse to accept surrenders. They cut down fleeing enemies, kill prisoners, and turn battlefield victory into massacre. Caesar allegedly tries stopping the killing, ordering his troops to show clemency. The veterans ignore him. 10,000 Pompeians die in the battle and subsequent slaughter. Another 15,000 are captured, many wounded. Juba's forces flee toward Numidia, abandoning Scipio entirely. The Numidian king, knowing Caesar will hunt him, commits suicide days later rather than face capture. Scipio attempts escape by ship. His vessel is intercepted by Caesar's fleet. Rather than surrender, Scipio draws his sword and kills himself. His body is thrown overboard. The man who commanded Pompey's African forces dies like his king Ptolemy, drowning in water he thought would save him. Cato, besieged in Utica and knowing the war is lost, faces Caesar's inevitable clemency offer. Cato has spent his entire political career opposing Caesar and arguing for constitutional governance. Accepting Caesar's pardon would mean living under the regime he fought to prevent, existing as Caesar's subject, publicly demonstrating that resistance is futile. He chooses death. Cato stabs himself in the stomach with his own sword, a deliberate painful suicide that takes hours. When servants find him and physicians attempt saving his life, Cato tears out his own intestines to ensure he dies. The suicide is calculated political theatre. Cato becomes a martyr for the Republic, a symbol of principled resistance that Caesar's clemency cannot corrupt. Caesar's response to Cato's death reveals his political genius. He writes a pamphlet called Anti-Cato, attacking the dead man's character and arguing that Cato's suicide was cowardice rather than principle. But the pamphlet's viciousness backfires. It makes Caesar look petty for attacking someone who can't defend himself and turns Cato into an even more powerful symbol of republican virtue. The African campaign ends with Caesar's complete victory but at terrible moral cost. The massacres at Thapsus violate everything Caesar claimed to stand for. His clemency policy, which won him supporters and legitimacy, is contradicted by soldiers killing surrendering enemies. Cato's principled suicide contrasts with Caesar's pragmatic survival. The Republic's defenders died for their beliefs, while Caesar compromised everything to win. Caesar returns to Rome in July 46 BC for the most elaborate triumph in Roman history. He celebrates 4 victories: Gaul, Egypt, Pontus, and Africa, in successive ceremonies spanning days. Captives parade through streets. Treasures from conquered territories fill wagons. Arsinoe, Cleopatra's sister, walks in chains before being released as gesture of clemency. The celebrations cost fortunes and bankrupt what remains of the treasury. But the triumph carefully avoids mentioning Romans. Official descriptions credit victories over foreign enemies, Gauls, Egyptians, Pontians, Numidians, never mentioning Pompey, Scipio, Cato, or the tens of thousands of Romans who died in civil war. The omission is deliberate fiction that everyone recognizes but nobody challenges publicly. He finally has what he wanted when he crossed the Rubicon: control of Rome, immunity from prosecution, and power to shape the Republic's future. But the cost has been devastating. The civil war killed hundreds of thousands, destroyed trade networks, bankrupted cities, and obliterated the political system it was supposedly fought to preserve. Caesar begins implementing reforms that suggest he understands the Republic cannot simply resume normal function. The calendar needs fixing. Roman calendar has become desynced with solar year through accumulated errors. He introduces the Julian calendar with 365.25-day years. Senate membership needs expanding. He appoints hundreds of new senators, diluting the old aristocracy's control. Grain distribution requires reorganization. Land grants for veterans must be arranged. But every reform reinforces that Caesar is making these decisions unilaterally. He's dictator, a constitutional office that's supposed to be temporary emergency measure. Caesar holds it indefinitely. He controls military forces. He appoints magistrates. He determines policy. The Republic exists in name but functions as monarchy with Caesar as uncrowned king. And the war still isn't quite over. Pompey's sons Gnaeus and Sextus have raised forces in Spain. They command 13 legions, recruited from Pompey's Spanish supporters and veterans who escaped earlier defeats. Spain was always Pompey's stronghold, and his sons leverage their father's name to build a final resistance. Caesar must return to war one more time. Caesar reaches Spain in November 45 BC with 8 veteran legions, expecting another quick campaign like Ilerda 7 years earlier. He's 55 years old now, his body showing wear from decades of continuous warfare. The seizures he's experienced since youth have become more frequent. Headaches plague him, but stopping isn't an option while Pompey's sons command armies that could threaten Italy. Gnaeus and Sextus Pompey have done something remarkable in Spain. They've built a competent military force from scratch in less than 2 years. Their 13 legions aren't the scratch recruits Caesar faced in earlier campaigns. Many are veterans who escaped Pharsalus and Thapsus, hardened survivors who know Roman tactics and hate Caesar personally. The brothers have trained them properly, equipped them adequately, and positioned them in terrain that favours defence. The Spanish campaign becomes the bloodiest of the entire civil war. Neither side offers quarter. Caesar's veterans remember comrades killed in Africa and blame Pompeian forces for prolonging the war. Pompey's supporters fight with desperation of men who know defeat means death. Caesar's clemency policy has limits, and nobody expects mercy after 4 years of continuous warfare. The armies meet near Munda in March, 45 BC. Pompey's forces occupy high ground, a ridge overlooking the plain where Caesar's legions deploy. The position is nearly perfect defensively. Any attack must advance uphill against entrenched enemies with superior observation. Caesar examines the terrain and knows assaulting will cost thousands of casualties. He attacks anyway because waiting achieves nothing. Pompey has secure supply lines while Caesar's forces are foraging through hostile territory. Time favours defenders. The only advantage Caesar possesses is veteran troops who fought together for years, and that advantage means nothing if he doesn't force battle. The assault begins at dawn. 8 legions advance uphill in standard triple-line formation, shields locked, maintaining cohesion despite the slope. Pompey's forces hold positions and pour javelins down on the attackers. The uphill charge exhausts Caesar's troops before they even reach enemy lines. Men stumble, formations waver, the exhaustion multiplies when the lines finally collide and close quarters fighting begins. Caesar's centre starts collapsing under pressure. The veterans who broke Pompey Magnus at Pharsalus and crushed Scipio at Thapsus are being pushed backward by Gnaeus Pompey's legions. The slope advantage negates Caesar's tactical superiority. His soldiers cannot generate the momentum that usually drives enemies backward. They're fighting uphill against fresh troops occupying prepared positions. For the first time since Dyrrhachium, Caesar faces the genuine possibility of total defeat. If his centre breaks completely, the entire army will rout. Pompey's cavalry will pursue and turn retreat into massacre. The civil war will continue, Caesar's reputation will shatter, and Spain will become a permanent Pompeian stronghold threatening Italy indefinitely. Caesar personally leads the 10th Legion forward, grabbing a shield from a fallen soldier and pushing into the front rank. Generals traditionally command from behind the lines, directing movements and committing reserves. Caesar fights in the press of combat, visible to both his troops and the enemy. The gesture is partly inspiration. Soldiers rally when their commander shares their danger, and partly calculation. If Caesar dies here, at least he dies fighting rather than fleeing. The 10th Legion, shamed by their general fighting in the front ranks while they falter, surges forward with renewed fury. They're the legion that mutinied 2 years ago, the unit Caesar called citizens instead of soldiers as insult. They've served him since Gaul began, survived every major battle, and they refuse to break while Caesar watches. The breakthrough comes on the flanks. Caesar's cavalry, smaller than Pompey's but better trained, identifies weak points in the enemy line and exploits them with concentrated charges. Roman cavalry doctrine emphasizes momentum. Hit hard at a single point rather than spreading attacks across the entire line. The tactic works. Pompey's right flank begins bending under cavalry pressure. Gnaeus Pompey commits his reserves to shore up the faltering flank. It's the correct decision tactically. Contain the breakthrough before it spreads. But committing reserves means no fresh troops remain to exploit Caesar's weakened centre. The battle becomes a pure endurance contest where both armies are fully committed, and victory goes to whoever refuses to break first. Caesar's veterans, despite exhaustion and casualties, do not break. They fought too many battles, survived too many desperate situations to panic now. The grinding combat continues for 8 hours, longer than Pharsalus, longer than any battle Caesar has fought. The sun climbs to noon, descends toward evening, and still the legions clash on Munda's slopes. Pompey's forces break first. Not dramatically like Pharsalus, where cavalry flight triggered general collapse, but gradually as accumulated exhaustion and casualties make defense unsustainable. Individual cohorts withdraw, adjacent units follow. The withdrawal becomes retreat when cavalry pursues and prevents orderly fallback. Caesar's veterans, remembering Thapsus, again refuse to accept surrenders. They cut down fleeing enemies, pursue into the camps, and kill anyone wearing Pompeian colours. 30,000 of Pompey's soldiers die in the battle and subsequent slaughter. Caesar loses perhaps 1,000 men. The exchange ratio is worse than Pharsalus, but still decisively in his favour. Gnaeus Pompey escapes the battlefield, but is hunted down and killed within weeks. His head is displayed in Escalation as warning to remaining resistors. Sextus Pompey, younger and less prominent, manages to flee by ship and will resurface years later to trouble Caesar's successors, but for now he's a fugitive without army or resources. Spain submits completely. The last significant Pompeian military force has been destroyed. Every major opponent is dead. Pompey Magnus drowned in Egypt. Cato suicided in Utica. Scipio killed himself at sea. Gnaeus Pompey hunted down in Spain. The civil war that began when Caesar crossed the Rubicon in January 49 BC ends in Spain in March 45 BC. 4 years and 2 months of continuous warfare across 3 continents. Caesar returns to Rome in October 45 BC and celebrates yet another triumph, this one explicitly for Spain. The celebration is muted compared to previous triumphs. Romans are tired of civil war, exhausted by continuous military levies, and resentful that Spain required another campaign. The Senate grants Caesar every honour imaginable, not from enthusiasm but from lack of alternatives. He's declared Dictator Perpetuo, Dictator in perpetuity, a title that contradicts the office's constitutional purpose as temporary emergency position. The Senate grants him title Imperator as permanent first name rather than temporary military honorific. They vote to put his image on coins, something previously reserved for dead heroes. They rename the month Quintilis to Julius in his honour. Every honour emphasises the same reality. Caesar is king in all but name. But Roman political culture despises kings. The Republic was founded by overthrowing kings 5 centuries earlier. Every Roman learns from childhood that Brutus the Elder expelled the Tarquins and established free government. King is the worst insult in Roman political vocabulary. Caesar holds absolute power while avoiding the title that would make that power unacceptable. The contradiction cannot last. Either Caesar accepts constitutional limitations that make him just another magistrate, or he becomes king and destroys the republic he claims to preserve. The middle position, absolute power without royal title, is unstable fiction that fools nobody. His reforms continue at accelerating pace. The Senate expands to 900 members, diluting aristocratic families' traditional dominance. He grants citizenship to entire provinces, extending Roman rights beyond Italy in unprecedented scope. The grain dole is reformed, reducing recipients from 320,000 to 150,000, while improving distribution efficiency. Debts are partially forgiven, helping common people while angering creditors. Veterans receive land grants carved from confiscated properties, creating a class of armed supporters loyal to Caesar personally. Each reform makes practical sense individually, but collectively they centralize power around Caesar. He decides Senate membership. He determines citizenship. He controls grain distribution. He manages debt relief. He allocates land. The Senate technically votes on these measures, but everyone knows they're approving Caesar's decisions rather than making independent choices. Opposition develops among the very senators Caesar has pardoned. Marcus Junius Brutus, whose mother was Caesar's lover and who might be Caesar's biological son, increasingly questions whether clemency was worth accepting. He survived Pharsalus because Caesar specifically ordered him spared, was given provincial governorship despite fighting for Pompey, and now sits in a senate that's a rubber stamp for Caesar's edicts. Gaius Cassius Longinus, another pardoned Pompeian, shares Brutus's resentment. Cassius is a capable general who commanded naval forces for Pompey, survived the civil war through Caesar's mercy, and received political appointments that should feel like rewards, but instead feel like reminders of subordination. Both men are republicans by conviction. aristocrats by birth and increasingly desperate to restore constitutional government before Caesar's reforms make restoration impossible. The conspiracy forms gradually through late 45 BC and early 44 BC. Perhaps 60 senators eventually join, most pardoned Pompeians, some longtime Caesar allies who've concluded that their general has become a tyrant. The core group around Brutus and Cassius keeps operational details secret. Conspiracies expand geometrically if recruitment is careless, and 60 participants already strain security. Their stated motive is preserving the Republic. Their unstated motive includes personal resentment at being subordinated, aristocratic fury at seeing their class power diminished, and genuine fear that Caesar intends making his position hereditary. Cleopatra is in Rome with Caesarion, living in Caesar's villa across the Tiber. The boy is 3 years old and obviously Caesar's son despite the lack of formal acknowledgement. If Caesar declares Caesarion his heir, the Republic becomes a monarchy with an Egyptian queen's son as future king. Caesar's behaviour feeds conspiracy fears. He accepts divine honours that edge toward claiming godhood. Temples vote him divine status. Statues appear throughout Rome showing Caesar with attributes of gods. He sits on a golden throne during Senate meetings. He wears the purple toga and laurel crown continuously, symbols of permanent triumph that traditionally last only the day of the ceremony. The Senate offers him a crown explicitly in February 44 BC during the Lupercalia festival. Mark Antony, serving as consul and Caesar's closest remaining ally, presents a royal diadem before the assembled crowd. Caesar refuses it dramatically, but the refusal is calculated theatre. He refuses crown while accepting every other symbol of kingship, letting him claim he's not king while functioning as one. The conspiracy decides Caesar must die before he accepts the crown formally. Once he's king officially, removing him means attacking divinely ordained authority. Better to kill him while the fiction of republican government provides justification. They plan the assassination for March 15th, the Ides of March, during a Senate meeting at Pompey's theatre complex. Caesar receives warnings. Soothsayers allegedly tell him to beware the Ides of March. His wife Calpurnia has nightmares and begs him to stay home. Anonymous letters warn of conspiracy. Rumours circulate through Rome streets that something is planned. Caesar ignores all warnings, possibly from arrogance, possibly from genuine inability to believe that men he pardoned would murder him. The Senate meeting begins normally. Caesar sits on his golden throne while senators present petitions. The conspirators surround him gradually, their positioning deliberate but appearing casual. Tullius Cimber approaches with a petition, grabbing Caesar's toga and pulling it down, the signal for attack. The first dagger strikes Caesar in the shoulder. He's 55 years old, his body weakened by years of campaigning and repeated seizures, but he fights back immediately. He stabs Casca, the first attacker, with his stylus, the metal pen used for writing on wax tablets. The wound is superficial but shows Caesar isn't dying without resistance. More daggers strike from all sides. Caesar spins, trying to defend himself against multiple attackers simultaneously. He's being stabbed by men he pardoned, people he trusted, senators who owed their positions to his clemency. The betrayal is comprehensive. Roughly 60 conspirators participate, each striking at least once to ensure collective responsibility. Brutus steps forward. Whether he's Caesar's biological son remains historical speculation, but Caesar certainly loved Brutus's mother and showed Brutus extraordinary favour. Their eyes meet. Caesar allegedly says, "Kai su, tek non," "you too, child," in Greek, though the phrase might be later invention. He covers his head with his toga and stops defending himself. 23 stab wounds later, Caesar collapses at the base of Pompey's statue. The irony is perfect. He dies beneath a monument to the man he defeated, killed by senators he pardoned, in a building named for his greatest enemy. The assassination takes less than 5 minutes from first strike to final collapse. The conspirators expect public celebration. They've killed a tyrant and restored republican liberty. They expect grateful citizens to praise their courage and constitutional principles. Instead, they face shocked silence from the crowd that witnessed the murder. Nobody cheers. Nobody thanks them. The Roman people watch in horror as senators covered in blood proclaim they've saved the Republic. Mark Antony flees, fearing he's next. The conspirators haven't planned beyond the murder itself. They assumed killing Caesar would automatically restore normal governance. Instead, they've created a power vacuum with no mechanism for filling it. The Senate has no legal authority without Caesar. The provinces don't know who to obey. The legions await orders from a general who's dead. Caesar's will, read publicly days later, reveals he's left 3/4 of his estate to the Roman people in direct cash payments. He's also posthumously adopted his great-nephew Gaius Octavius, now renamed Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. The 18-year-old Octavian becomes Caesar's legal son and heir, inheriting both wealth and political authority. The funeral becomes a riot. Antony delivers a speech emphasizing Caesar's clemency toward the very men who murdered him. He displays Caesar's bloody toga, showing the 23 stab wounds. The crowd's shock turns to rage. Mobs hunt conspirators through Rome's streets. Brutus and Cassius flee the city within days. The second triumvirate forms, Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus, to hunt down Caesar's murderers and avenge his death. The assassination triggers another civil war that lasts 13 years, costs hundreds of thousands more lives, and ends with Octavian as Rome's first emperor. The conspirators who killed Caesar to save the Republic instead ensured its final destruction. The dictatorship they tried to prevent becomes the monarchy they feared. Caesar's legacy is contradictory and vast. He destroyed the Republic but made the empire possible. His clemency was genuine yet calculated. His reforms improved Roman governance while centralizing power dangerously. He was brilliant general, ruthless politician, visionary statesman, and ambitious autocrat simultaneously. The man who crossed the Rubicon in 49 BC, seeking immunity from prosecution, died in 44 BC, controlling the Mediterranean world, but unable to solve the fundamental problem. Republican institutions couldn't govern an empire, but Romans wouldn't accept a king. His successors would spend decades fighting over his inheritance before Octavian, taking the name Augustus, finally established the system Caesar couldn't quite create. Monarchy disguised as republic, absolute power veiled in constitutional forms. The Rubicon crossing ended the Republic the moment Caesar's boots hit Italian soil. Everything afterward was just the Republic dying slowly, taking 4 years of civil war and Caesar's assassination to finally expire. The die was cast in January 49 BC. By March 44 BC, the game was over even if the pieces kept moving. Rome would never again be governed by Senate debate and citizen assemblies. The emperors who followed, Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, and dozens more, all owed their positions to the precedent Caesar established. Absolute power justified by military victory and popular support, constitutional forms maintained as fiction while one man ruled. The Republic died at the Rubicon. It just took 5 more years to stop moving. The conspirators flee Rome within 72 hours of the assassination, realizing too late that murdering Caesar solved nothing. Brutus and Cassius head east, attempting to rally provincial support and raise armies from legions that remember Pompey. Decimus Brutus goes north to Cisalpine Gaul, where he commands legions theoretically loyal to him. The 60 senators who participated scatter like refugees, each seeking whatever protection geography and old alliances might provide. Mark Antony seizes control of Rome through speed and audacity that mirrors Caesar's own tactics. As consul, he possesses legal authority the conspirators lack. He secures Caesar's papers, including documents outlining planned reforms and provincial appointments. Whether these papers are genuine or Antony fabricates them later becomes irrelevant. He controls the narrative and uses Caesar's posthumous authority to legitimize his own decisions. The Senate, terrified of both Antony's power and mob violence, grants amnesty to Caesar's assassins while simultaneously confirming all Caesar's acts and appointments. The contradiction is spectacular. They declare the murder justified while endorsing everything the murdered man implemented. Constitutional logic has completely collapsed into expedient compromises that satisfy nobody. Octavian arrives in Rome in May 44 BC, barely 18 years old, to claim his inheritance. He's Caesar's great-nephew through his mother Aetia, Caesar's niece, but the adoption makes him Caesar's legal son. Most observers dismiss him as irrelevant, a sickly teenager with no military experience, no political base, and no obvious qualifications beyond famous name. Antony treats him with contempt, refusing to hand over Caesar's war chest that Octavian needs to pay the bequest to Roman citizens. The teenager proves more dangerous than anyone anticipated. Octavian begins recruiting Caesar's veterans using his own money borrowed against future inheritance. He cultivates relationships with Caesar's former officers. He positions himself as Caesar's true heir, while Antony appears as opportunistic usurper. The propaganda campaign is sophisticated beyond his years, suggesting advisors are shaping strategy, while Octavian provides the name and legitimacy. Cicero, the Republic's greatest orator, returns to political prominence by attacking Antony in a series of speeches called the Philippics. The elderly statesman sees opportunity to use Octavian against Antony, then discard the boy once Antony is defeated. Cicero's calculation is obvious and condescending. He refers to Octavian as the boy in private letters, and believes he can manipulate an 18-year-old into serving Republican interests. Decimus Brutus refuses to surrender Cisalpine Gaul to Antony when the consul attempts claiming the province through senatorial decree. The refusal triggers immediate crisis. Antony has legal authority to demand the province, but Decimus commands the actual legions occupying it. Antony besieges Decimus at Mutina, using forces he's recruited from Caesar's veterans, who remember their general's clemency and trust Antony's promises. The Senate, desperate to check Antony's growing power, sends Octavian with 2 legions to relieve Decimus. The strategy seems sound. Let Caesar's heir and Caesar's assassin cooperate against Antony, then deal with Octavian afterward. Cicero congratulates himself on the cleverness. 2 of Antony's legions defect to Octavian immediately upon seeing Caesar's adopted son commanding senatorial forces. The defections demonstrate that name matters more than legal authority when dealing with veteran soldiers. The battles of Forum Gallorum and Mutina in April 43 BC result in Antony's defeat. His forces are scattered, his siege is broken, and he retreats across the Alps into Gaul. Both consuls commanding the senatorial forces die in battle, leaving Octavian as the senior military commander despite being 19 years old and holding no official rank. The Senate's response reveals how little Rome's elite understands the new reality. They vote honours to Decimus Brutus for defending his province and pointedly snub Octavian. The teenager who just saved Decimus and defeated Antony receives minimal recognition because senators still see him as a useful tool rather than independent power. Cicero drafts the decrees, confident that the boy will accept whatever scraps the Senate tosses him. Octavian marches on Rome with 8 legions in August 43 BC, 19 months after Caesar crossed the Rubicon. The parallel is deliberate. Octavian is demonstrating he learned from his adoptive father's example. The Senate, facing armed force with no military resources of their own, capitulates immediately. Octavian enters Rome legally elected consul despite being 10 years below the constitutional age requirement. Then he pivots completely. Rather than destroying Antony as the Senate expects, Octavian opens negotiations. Antony is regrouped in Gaul, recruited fresh legions, and allied with Lepidus, who commands forces in Spain. Together they outnumber any force Octavian could raise from Italy alone. More importantly, all 3 men want the same thing: revenge on Caesar's assassins and division of Rome's empire among themselves. The 3 generals meet on an island in the Reno River in October 43 BC. The conference lasts 3 days. They emerge having formed the Second Triumvirate, a legal dictatorship that gives them absolute power to reorganize the state. Unlike Caesar's informal alliance with Pompey and Crassus, this triumvirate is constitutionally authorized by the terrified Senate and enshrined in law. The triumvir's first act is proscription. They publish lists of enemies to be killed, their property confiscated, and their families punished. It's Sulla's purge repeated but worse. The triumvirs need money to pay their legions and political cover to eliminate rivals. Approximately 300 senators and 2,000 equestrians are proscribed, their names posted publicly with rewards for their deaths. Cicero's name appears on the proscription list despite Octavian's initial reluctance. Antony demands it as price for cooperation. The elderly statesman who thought he was manipulating the boy instead becomes victim of the boy's cold political calculation. Cicero attempts fleeing to Macedonia but moves too slowly. Antony's soldiers catch him at his villa in December 43 BC. The old man accepts death with dignity that his political career often lacked. He extends his neck from the litter and tells the executioners to proceed. They cut off his head and hands, the hands that wrote the Philippics denouncing Antony. The body parts are displayed on the rostra in the forum where Cicero delivered his greatest speeches. Antony's wife Fulvia allegedly stabs Cicero's tongue with hairpins, symbolically punishing the eloquence that attacked her husband. The proscriptions fund the triumvir's war against Brutus and Cassius, while eliminating political opposition. Anyone with wealth and questionable loyalty faces potential death. Neighbour denounces neighbour. Slaves betray masters for freedom. The violence is systematic, profitable, and completely destroys whatever remained of republican norms about legal process and citizen rights. Brutus and Cassius have spent 2 years raising armies in the east. They control Syria, Macedonia, and most of Asia Minor. Their forces exceed 100,000 men, larger than any army the triumvirs can field individually. The assassins claim they represent legitimate republican government defending constitutional law against tyrannical usurpers. The claim is technically accurate but politically meaningless when backed by armies recruited through the same extra-legal methods the triumvirs use. The forces meet at Philippi in Macedonia in October 42 BC, exactly 2.5 years after Caesar's assassination. Octavian commands forces alongside Antony, but is ill during the actual battles. His health has always been fragile, and campaign conditions worsen his chronic ailments. Antony handles tactical command while Octavian's presence provides political legitimacy through Caesar's name. The first battle goes badly for the triumvirs. Brutus's forces crush Octavian's camp while Antony defeats Cassius. Both sides claim victory, but Cassius believes the day is lost and commits suicide rather than face capture. His death hands psychological advantage to the triumvirs. The conspirators' forces lost one of their 2 commanders while the triumvirs' leadership remains intact. 3 weeks later, the armies engage again. Brutus's forces are demoralized by Cassius's death and running short on supplies. The second battle becomes a grinding infantry clash that lasts all day. Brutus's lines finally break under concentrated pressure. 14 legions of Republicans flee or surrender. Brutus escapes the battlefield but realizes the cause is finished. He commits suicide that night, the last major conspirator to die. The final words attributed to Brutus vary by source, but the sentiment is consistent. He regrets that virtue and honour led to defeat while treachery and ambition won. The Republic's defenders are dead while Caesar's heirs rule. The irony would be literary if it weren't soaked in blood. Octavian and Antony divide the Roman world between them. Antony takes the wealthy east, Egypt, Syria, Asia Minor, Greece. Octavian gets Italy, Spain, and Gaul. Lepidus receives Africa as consolation prize and will be gradually marginalized until he holds nothing. The division is supposed to be partnership, but both men know eventually one must destroy the other. Antony goes to Egypt and falls into the same trap that caught Caesar. Cleopatra seduces him, or he seduces her, or they recognize mutual advantage and formalize it through romance. The actual dynamics matter less than the political result. Antony abandons his Roman wife Octavia, who happens to be Octavian's sister, and marries Cleopatra in Egyptian ceremony. He declares Caesarion legitimate heir to Caesar's legacy, directly threatening Octavian's position. The propaganda war begins immediately. Octavian portrays Antony as corrupted by foreign seductress, abandoning Roman values for Oriental decadence. Antony presents himself as Alexander's successor, building Eastern Empire that eclipses Rome's Western territories. Both men recruit legions and prepare for war that's inevitable once the triumvirate's legal authority expires. Octavian consolidates power in Italy through methods Caesar pioneered but executes with ruthless efficiency his adoptive father sometimes lacked. He confiscates land for veteran settlements, crushing resistance through military force when Italian towns protest. He controls grain supply. He manages public opinion through careful propaganda. He's building the foundation for permanent rule, while maintaining fiction of republican restoration. The final confrontation comes at Actium in September 31 BC, 13 years after Caesar's assassination. Antony commands 500 ships and 100,000 soldiers. Octavian has 400 ships and 80,000 men. The naval battle becomes disaster for Antony when Cleopatra's Egyptian squadron flees mid-battle and Antony abandons his fleet to follow her. Whether betrayal, panic, or strategic withdrawal, the result is catastrophic. Antony's forces surrender to Octavian without their commanders present. Antony and Cleopatra retreat to Alexandria, knowing Octavian will pursue. The city that trapped Caesar now becomes their tomb. Antony receives false report that Cleopatra is dead and stabs himself. He's carried dying to Cleopatra's mausoleum where she's barricaded herself. He expires in her arms, the triumvir who controlled half the Roman world dying as failed romantic rather than defeated general. Cleopatra attempts negotiating with Octavian, offering wealth, territory, anything to preserve some independence. Octavian refuses all offers. He needs Egypt's resources and cannot risk Cleopatra escaping to raise another rebellion. She commits suicide by snakebite according to tradition, though the actual method is disputed. What's certain is that Egypt's last pharaoh dies rather than parade in Octavian's triumph. Octavian murders Caesarion shortly after entering Alexandria. The 17-year-old son of Caesar and Cleopatra represents alternative claim to Caesar's legacy. Octavian, merely adopted son, cannot tolerate biological son's existence. The execution is cold political calculation, eliminating rival claim while the boy is powerless to defend himself. Egypt becomes Roman province, its grain feeds Italy, its wealth funds Octavian's consolidation of power. The annexation completes Rome's control of the Mediterranean. Every shore from Spain to Syria now answers to one government, and that government increasingly answers to one man. Octavian returns to Rome in August 29 BC and celebrates triple triumph for victories in Illyricum, Actium, and Egypt. The ceremonies last 3 days, displaying treasures that dwarf Caesar's earlier triumphs. But Octavian is smarter than his adoptive father about managing appearance versus reality. He doesn't accept divine honours immediately. He doesn't wear royal symbols constantly. He doesn't make himself obvious target for assassination. Instead, he carefully constructs constitutional fiction that gives him absolute power while maintaining republican forms. The Senate grants him the title Augustus, revered one, which sounds religious rather than political. He holds tribunician power, giving him veto over any legislation. He commands all military forces through proconsular imperium. He controls Egypt personally as private possession. He manages grain distribution. Every lever of power is in his hands, but legally he's just first citizen, princeps, among equals. The transformation from republic to empire is complete. It took 19 years from Rubicon to Actium, 4 more years to cement Augustus's position beyond challenge. The governmental system will last 500 years in the west, 1500 in the east, governing more territory than any previous state, and creating cultural legacy that persists millennia after the last emperor falls. But it began with Caesar wading through a stream barely 15 feet wide, gambling that speed and audacity could overcome constitutional law and military odds. Everything else, Pharsalus, Alexandria, the assassinations, the proscriptions, Philippi, Actium, flowed inevitably from that January morning when Caesar decided that crossing into Italy with an army was preferable to facing his enemies in court. The Republic's defenders were right that Caesar destroyed their system. They were wrong that killing him would save it. The Republic couldn't govern an empire. Its institutions assumed a city-state, not Mediterranean superpower. Its political culture couldn't handle generals commanding permanent professional armies loyal to commanders rather than state. The system was broken before Caesar crossed the Rubicon. He just made the breaking visible and irreversible. Augustus learned from Caesar's mistake. You can be king, just don't call yourself king. You can hold absolute power, just maintain constitutional fictions. You can destroy the Republic, just pretend you're restoring it. The lesson echoes through history every time autocracy wears democracy's clothes, every time military force disguises itself as legal authority, every time one person accumulates power while pretending institutions still function. Caesar crossed the Rubicon and conquered Rome. Augustus learned to make the conquest permanent, and the Republic's ghost haunted the empire for 5 centuries, maintained in forms and titles even as reality transformed beyond recognition. That's how Caesar crossed the Rubicon and conquered Rome, not with the crossing itself, but with everything it unleashed: civil war, assassination, proscription, and finally the empire that Romans spent 200 years building and 500 years telling themselves was still, somehow, the republic their ancestors founded. The die was cast, the game played out, and when the pieces finally stopped moving, Rome had become something its founders would barely recognize, but something that would shape Western civilization for 2,000 years.